Chapter 1265. Have you been prepared? The gentle smile on his mother's face disappeared. Her face became gloomy, and there was a hint of fear. His father calmly said, I have said that he doesn't treat us as his biological parents. He is always on guard against us. Can you tell me why? Dean looked at them and calmed down. From the assassination to the present, only a few breaths had passed. He seemed very calm from beginning to end, but there were still some unfathomable emotions in his eyes. It was pain, puzzlement, and regret. Why? His father's face was no longer kind and doting. He just coldly said, Because you are a god, but we are human. Kill. He roared, and his body spread out a blazing white light. With the help of Dean, they had successfully become kings, and all of them had the top 5-star legendary magic marks. They belonged to the strongest level in the dynasty. His father didn't want to give Dean any more time to react after the previous failed assassination. From all the information he had collected about Dean's battles, he knew that his son was as resourceful as a demon. Maybe he was secretly brewing something while chatting with you, so he had to make the first move to gain the upper hand. Dean's eyebrows twitched slightly, and his perception quickly spread out, covering every corner of the crowded and noisy square. The sudden battle here shocked the surrounding crowd. When the onlookers reacted, they immediately ran away in panic. The square was in chaos. It happened that this was the most expensive commercial street nearby. Most of the people who came here to shop and play were nobles or rich people. Most of them had carriages or cars. At this moment, the chaos suddenly became a hindrance. In the panic of the crowd, Dean suddenly felt a large number of figures coming here in an orderly manner. They seemed to be the guards patrolling here. Whoosh! A beam of light came head-on. It was his father. His ability was similar to the King of Light. He could control the power of light, squeeze energy from cells, and control light waves to attack. Dean slightly tilted his head and easily dodged the attack. At the same time, he said, You should have planned this for a long time. The three of you are not my opponent. Let the other gangsters come out. We are enough to kill you. Father roared. His legs glowed, and he suddenly ejected, appearing in front of Dean as if teleporting. A laser-like sword swept toward Dean's neck. Dean was not surprised. His face was as calm as the lake. He raised his hand and flicked his fingers. The light condensed at his fingertips collided with the glowing blade. The blade bounced off and shattered. Father's pupils shrank. He didn't expect Dean's strength to be so terrifying. He was a king-level expert, and a strong existence among the king-level experts. But his 3 attacks were all easily cracked. The gap in strength was almost overwhelming. This is quasi-deity power? Father suddenly felt a creepy feeling hit his chest, and he hurriedly retreated in panic. Looking from the side, he suddenly appeared in front of Dean, and then quickly retreated. When he returned to his original place, he seemed to be frightened, gasping for breath, and his face was slightly pale. Whoosh! Dean didn't look back, but he could see that several sharp blades were coming out of Danny's body. She was stabbing towards him. Her ability was the magic marks of the splitter. Dean was silent and did not seem to react. But the moment Annie rushed over, a sharp blade more than 10 meters long suddenly ejected from his back. Puff! It instantly pierced through Annie's shoulder. The protruding blade at the front of the sharp blade pushed her body back. She was thrown to the square behind her. Half of her body was dyed red and dripping with blood. They were both using the magic marks of Splitter, but Dean's use of the magic marks and the accumulated energy in his body was far more than Annie's. The speed of constructing the sharp blades was more than 10 times faster than Annie's. At this time, a large number of heavily armed guards rushed out of the chaotic crowd. One of them rushed toward Dean and said, Your Majesty, we have come to escort you. Before he could get close, a sharp blade popped out from Dean's arm. Bang! The blade pierced his chest armor, but the armor was not penetrated on the spot. The guard flew out and fell to the ground. The rest of the guards immediately surrounded him, but stopped approaching. Their eyes were exposed from behind the helmet. They looked at Dean nervously and fearfully. This thing has protected your aura. If you don't deliberately sense it, then it's easy to ignore it. Is this the reason why you betrayed me? Dean's eyes swept over the guards and finally fell on his father and mother in front of him. He slowly said, "You chose to attack me in the most bustling area to reduce my vigilance. You thought that there wouldn't be any danger in this bustling area. I can see that you have planned this for a long time." "Why?" he asked again. "Kill." The answer was a cold word. The surrounding people dressed as guards seemed to have received an order and immediately swarmed forward. However, Dean's eyelids twitched slightly as soon as they made their moves. Although he had expected a lot of things from the assassination of his parents, he still didn't expect that these people were all king-level existences. They exposed their aura and body energy as soon as they made their moves. There were more than 100 of them. He had a general understanding of the king-level existences of the dynasty. Except for Barton, Sergei, and others, there were no more than 10 king-level existences. However, the number of king-level existences in front of him was 10 times more than he knew. It must be known that every king-level existences had destructive power that was no less than a mobile nuclear bomb. If hundreds of king-level existences attacked crazily, then the entire planet would be destroyed. It seems that you have been planning for a few years. Was it 10 years ago or 8 years ago? Dean's eyes gradually became cold. His body suddenly swelled as he was surrounded by the king-level existences. From his fingers, arms, shoulders, chest, knees, and other parts of his body, dark blades were shot out. They were dozens of meters long and were covered with dark energy. They had the destructive power to annihilate all matter. Lightning body, nothingness, gravity. Many king-level existences used their own abilities as they saw Dean take the initiative to attack. Some used their life-saving abilities, some used their offensive abilities to attack, some used their controlling abilities to restrict Dean's movement, and some sang treacherous songs to use their spiritual attacks to attack Dean's brain. The next moment, hundreds of blades swept out and cut the bodies of more than 20 king-level existences. These king-level existences relied on their strange defensive methods to resist Dean's blade attacks. However, the next moment they screamed as their bodies flew out. In just one attack, Dean severely injured more than 20 king-level existences and beheaded 6 of them on the spot. On the other hand, Dean had received long-range attacks from more than 30 kings. These were energy-based attacks, but there seemed to be a layer of protective film on the surface of his body. All the attacks fell on his body, but he was unscathed. Even the strange, spiritual attacks that attacked his brain were like stones sinking into the sea. They were completely shielded. How is this possible? Everyone's eyes almost protruded out of their sockets as they looked at the scene in disbelief. Hundreds of king-level existences attacked at the same time. Even the entire king city would be smashed into pieces. How could Dean block all of them at the same time? More than 20 king-level existences who relied on their strong defense were the most frightened ones. At the moment, their wounds were cut by the blades, and blood kept flowing out. In addition, there was a corrosive force that was constantly eroding their bodies. It was like a plague virus that forced them to quickly divide new cells to replace the injured cells. However, the speed of division barely kept up with the speed of corrosion, which made the wounds unable to heal. Chapter 1266. His abilities are too complicated. Our attacks are all ineffective. It's like we are being assimilated. Is he a god? Isn't he a quasi-god? Isn't he relying on the sage's engine to barely surpass the king level? Why is this happening? Everyone looked at the demonic figure in horror. They felt that they were experiencing a nightmare. They wanted to wake up quickly, but they knew that death was the only way to free them from this nightmare. The first step of their plan was to cooperate with Dean's biological parents and sister. They would choose a place with many people to lower Dean's vigilance and wait for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. It would be the best if they could kill him in one blow. Whether it was the environment or the person who would launch a sneak attack, it was easy to make Dean lose his guard. They estimated that the success rate of the sneak attack was as high as 70%. However, the sneak attack failed. However, They had already prepared a complete plan. The second step was for all of them to attack at the same time and kill Dean in seconds. There were more than 100 king-level experts gathered here. They knew how powerful they were, let alone hundreds of king-level experts. Even 2 or 3 king-level experts wouldn't be able to resist. According to their investigation, although Dean was strong, he was only a demigod. He was embedded in the philosopher's engine, so he could stimulate the potential of his body. However, he was only a demigod. He was far from being an omnipotent and invincible god. They were sure to kill him as long as he wasn't a monster like Godwa that couldn't be killed by Big Ivan. Moreover, they knew that Dean had a fatal weakness. It was his heart. Once the sage's engine in his heart was destroyed, he wouldn't be able to live for long. Moreover, his combat strength would be directly reduced to the king level. Hundreds of king-level experts would be enough to turn him into a meat patty. However, the second step of their plan also failed. To them, they had already made sufficient preparations, but all their efforts had been for naught. Moreover, the power exposed by Dean was much stronger than what they had imagined. In just one confrontation, 6 people were killed, more than a dozen were injured, and the rest didn't touch Dean's blade. If they had touched it, most of them would have been seriously injured or dead. This terrifying sharp blade was like an electric baton that could not be touched. Once touched, one would fall to the ground. The number of people doesn't mean anything. Dean slightly raised his eyes and indifferently glanced at the eyes behind the armor. The material of the armor was special, so his X-ray vision couldn't penetrate it. Even a sharp blade could barely pierce through it. Otherwise, the previous attack would have killed more than 6 people. Father saw this scene, and there was no half of the familiar and kind appearance of Dadian in the past, but as if there was a deep hatred between him and Dadian. His face was almost distorted. There was both anger and fear. Although you've become kings, it hasn't been long, and your control over your own power is too weak. Compared to the kings who once dominated the imperial capital, you're much weaker. Dean looked around and said indifferently, "But even the former kings are just ants in front of me. There is no difference between us. Numbers don't represent strength. Just like 100 eggs can't break a stone. Even if there are 1,000 or 10,000 eggs, it will still be the same." Dean's indifferent voice floated in the square in addition to the frightened crowd that was gradually moving away. Everyone looked at him in horror. Dean's words were like a knife that hit their hearts. Don't listen to his nonsense. His strength is limited, and he may not be able to use that kind of attack more than a few times. We have to kill him, even if we have to exhaust him to death. We have no way out. Sister Danny climbed up from the pool of blood on the square and said while gritting her teeth. Everyone heard her words and hesitated for a moment. They thought of the mountains of corpses and seas of blood under the feet of the emperor and the blood on his hands. They immediately rushed over again. Ignorant, Dean looked indifferent. Although he was a little surprised by the hundreds of kings, it didn't mean that they could defeat him. Lin Changsheng had more than 200 years of vast memory and knowledge. Although he wasn't a real god, he had a richer application of abilities than the god of Wa. Moreover, the speed of the philosopher's engine to mobilize the body's energy made him far above the ordinary kings. Even the god of Wa might not be able to defeat him in a short time. Of course, he couldn't defeat the god of Wa either. Instead, she would secretly learn and adapt to him. Toxic Touch, Dungeon Cage, Magic Arrow. All the kings used their special skills, and all kinds of energy rampaged in the air. The ground under the plaza cracked open, and the buildings in the surrounding shopping street collapsed. The nobles and tycoons who were running away in panic were burned alive by the high temperature. Some were struck by the lightning that filled the air and were electrocuted to ashes, leaving nothing behind. The raging flames dyed the sky red, and the dark green, poisonous gas spread in the air. It was like a doomsday scene. The whole king's city was affected by the attacks of many kings, and there were countless casualties. Whoosh, whoosh. One by one, the kings with extraordinary fighting ability rushed towards Dean. Some transformed into half-human, half-dragon. Some looked like bat-winged demons, and some were covered with sharp scales. At this moment, they swarmed towards Dean from all kinds of tricky angles. Dean's expression didn't change in the slightest. His whole body swelled into a ball, and sharp blades appeared from all parts of his body. Each of them was dozens of meters long, and there were almost no blind spots. The kings who were ready to approach had seen the horror of the sharp blades, so they could only retreat quickly. At this moment, Dean was like a big hedgehog, and no one could attack him. The energy attacks that fell on Dean's body disappeared without a trace. All the energy was assimilated and absorbed into his body's energy. Whoosh! The sharp blades all over Dean's body suddenly became soft and fluttered like kelp. They flew out and hit more than a dozen kings who couldn't dodge in time. Some were directly cut in half, and some turned into flaming men. But after being cut by the sharp blades, they were still cut off. The wounds turned into black flames, and it looked like a big mouth of a demon was gnawing. Plop! One of the king's chest was pierced, and he fell in front of Dean. He glanced at him, and then waved the sharp blade to stab at him, ready to kill him. But at this moment, the armor on the king's head fell and rolled to the side, revealing the face inside. The sharp blade that was stabbing down stopped abruptly. Chapter 1267. Barton? Dean looked at the face behind the armor. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked up and glanced at the kings around him. There was a small hole at the front of each blade. Long white silk spread out like a spider web and stuck to the bodies of the kings. The white silk was sticky and tough. Many kings were trapped and couldn't break free. Why? A sharp blade, covered with annihilation dark energy, reached Barton's chest. Dean's expression was blurred in the shadows. Only a low voice could be heard. It was still the same question. Barton didn't expect that his helmet would fall. He was stunned for a moment. He said in a dejected tone, "Dean, I'm sorry. Kill me. Why did you betray me?" Dean's voice was still low, and there was no sadness or anger in it. "Did I mistreat you, or did I do something wrong to you? I brought you out from the orphanage. You said that you would repay me with your life. Now I've made you the king of millions of people. You will have monstrous power, and your name will shake the world. How many people in the world don't know you? I've never asked you to repay me. But why did you betray me?" Barton clenched his teeth and fingers. His face couldn't help but twitch. He was full of shame, pain, and sadness. "Dean, I'm sorry. I'm worse than a beast. Kill me." "Why?" Dean asked again. It was still the same 3 words. The rims of Barton's eyes were slightly red. Tears flowed down from the corners of his eyes and onto his temples. They wet his temples and fell on the broken stone floor. He suddenly covered his eyes with his arms and wept. "Why?" Dean looked up. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were bloodshot as he stared at his parents. Most of the kings were struggling in the cobweb. They didn't dare to attack alone. They could only rescue the other kings who were entangled in the cobweb. However, the material of the cobweb was extremely special, and it was constantly changing. Even the kings who had special means couldn't break free. Many of the kings were shocked and scared. They didn't expect that Dean could subdue them once again. The gap between them was so big that it made them feel fear. "Why?" His mother looked at him coldly, took a deep breath, and said, "You are a god, and we are only mortals. You may live forever, but we will die in the end. You were never willing to share the secret of becoming a god with us. You never planned to let us become gods, because once everyone became gods, they would be a threat to you, and you would no longer be able to stand above everyone else. So, only when you die can we live on forever." Dean's mouth twitched. "So, are you for immortality? We've known for a long time that you have the ability to learn about your past. I'm sure you've known for a long time that you're not our biological child. You're just a tool that we've created." His father said solemnly, "Do you still remember why we created you? It was to solve the medical problems of mankind, to increase the lifespan of mankind, to live longer. As long as I become a god, I will never die." Dean was silent for a moment. "So you are the same as the demonic insects and origami. You are pursuing immortality and immortality. You can even kill me for this, right? That's right. If you had shared the secret of becoming a god with us earlier, we wouldn't have treated you like this. Dean suddenly smiled and said to himself, I resurrected you, but you want me to die. Indeed, you're not my parents, not at all. I made a mistake. That must be it. Hearing his words, his father and mother's faces changed at the same time. They were both angry and afraid. Barton, what about you? Are you also for immortality? Dean looked at Barton, who was in front of his feet, and smiled gently. Barton wiped his tears, looked at Dean, and gritted his teeth. Dean, I'm sorry. If I didn't do it, my wife, my child, they would all die. Just kill me. I only ask that you let my wife and child go. They are innocent. I beg you. Wife, child, Dean murmured, and suddenly shook his head. I forgot that you are married and have your own family. You are no longer single. Well, they use your wife and child's life to hold you hostage, so you can help them to kill me. No matter how much I helped you, or how many times I saved you, I am just an outsider in front of your family. Dean, I'm sorry. Without you, there wouldn't be me today. Barton clenched his fists, and his face was full of pain and regret. Dean laughed. Using your wife and child to hold you hostage may not be able to completely persuade you. I'm afraid that you also want me to disappear, right? Dean laughed. There's no rule in this world that favors must be repaid. People's hearts are always so changeable. That's probably the reason why I despise life. Because life is really, really humble, so humble that it's worthless. At this point, the sharp blade hanging in front of Barton's chest suddenly pierced into Barton's heart. Suddenly, thick blood spurted out of Barton's mouth. His eyes widened. It seemed that he didn't expect that Dean would really kill him. But when he saw Dean's indifferent eyes, he seemed to have understood. He felt the vitality in his chest quickly disappear as if it was being absorbed by something. He used all his strength to beg, I beg you, let go of my wife and child. They are really innocent. The sharp blade was pulled out and blood spilled. Dean didn't look at him again. His eyes slowly swept over the other kings around him. He said in a cold voice, Take off your helmets. Let me see who else is involved. The kings who broke free from the spider web looked at each other, but no one took off their helmets. If today's assassination failed, they could hide their identity and continue to live. But if they were exposed, then they would be completely finished. Then let me see for myself. Dean's eyes slowly narrowed. An array of cold light flashed. His body suddenly swept out, and the sharp blades on his body danced like a group of snakes, killing the crowd. I dodged. Why is it like this? Damn, there is something invisible. More than a dozen kings were injured, and 4 of them were killed on the spot. The rest of the kings were scared by Dean's fierce offensive, although they knew that they had the advantage in numbers. But at the moment, the huge number didn't give them the slightest sense of security. Their vision was not ordinary, and they could see that it was almost impossible to defeat Dean by relying on numbers. Some people made a prompt decision and retreated. The kings were defeated even faster and earlier than the ordinary soldiers. If it was a team of 100 soldiers, they might only think of retreating when there were only a dozen or so soldiers left. However, the kings were far smarter than the ordinary soldiers, so they understood the situation much earlier and chose to retreat even earlier. Perhaps this was why when a group of smart people gathered together, they would become a group of smart pigs. Dwani couldn't believe what she saw. She didn't expect that the kings didn't have the ability to fight against Dean. It was a complete one-sided slaughter. It was the first time that they saw Dean show extraordinary strength. The last time was when Dean killed the Chelan king. But the battle ended quickly, and they couldn't see anything. Since Dean had built the dynasty, all the matters were handed over to Barton and others to deal with. He stayed in a laboratory and almost didn't fight. Therefore, they didn't have a strong concept of the quasi-deity. They could only speculate from Dean's previous battles, but they didn't personally observe those battles. They didn't expect that the gap between a king and a quasi-deity was bigger than the gap between a hunter and the abyss. Dean's sharp blade cut off the arm of a king. His eyes narrowed as he saw the king's face. But soon he loosened his eyes. He didn't wait for the king to speak as his sharp blade flashed and cut off the king's head. He chased after the other kings like a hungry wolf, his unstoppable blades easily piercing through their bodies. Even if their bodies had been transformed into energy, they could not withstand it. The structure of his blades was not a simple cutting blade. Instead, it contained the power of annihilation, as well as other special abilities. After all, with Lin Chongqing's vast knowledge, it was as if he had obtained the abilities of all demonic beasts, or perhaps even more. Today's ending is not going to happen. It's going to happen tomorrow. Writing Pen, Chinese Network. Chapter 1268. Ron, we are no match for him. The information is wrong. He is a god. Many king-level warriors fled. Some tried to fight back, but their attacks didn't have any effect on Dean. Even if the attacks were effective and brought damage to Dean, the damage would be healed in an instant. Shadow ability, you are Aurora? Dean saw one of the escaping figures. She was wearing an exquisite silver armor that covered her breasts. At this moment, she used her magic mark ability and turned into a shadow. She blended into the shadows of other kings. This was a 5-star legendary ability that Aurora had selected and strengthened. She was second to none in terms of survival and assassination. She was also called the Shadow Queen. Whoosh! A cold light flickered in his eyes, and a shadow suddenly extended from one of the sharp blades. It flew out, and in the blink of an eye, it caught up with the shadow of a king. The next moment, a figure suddenly flew out from inside. It was the silver-armored female knight who had turned into a shadow. The sharp blade suddenly changed direction, becoming as soft as kelp. It shot out a bolt of lightning and struck the armor on top of his head, revealing a face with tears in her eyes. It was Aurora, who had reported the matter to him earlier. Dean's indifferent eyes flashed as he saw her sad face. The sharp blade bypassed her and pierced through the body of a king behind her, tearing it apart. Divine Cage, Dean shouted in a low voice. Suddenly, the ground within a radius of dozens of miles cracked, and a large number of white silk shot out from inside, converging into the sky, like a snow-white bowl upside down on the ground, shrouding the area. Ordinary dignitaries and rich businessmen in this area were also imprisoned. They knelt on the ground in horror and begged loudly. In the next moment, white spiderweb-like spears shot out from the inner walls of the cage, piercing down from the sky like raindrops. The indiscriminate attack turned the entire land into a purgatory. Countless civilians were instantly pierced through. The silver spiderweb-like spears had strong corrosive properties, and the bodies of those who were pierced quickly melted, turning into puddles of blood. The guards who were guarding this area were also hit by this attack. All the escaping kings were horrified. They didn't expect that the emperor's methods were so cold. It was far more cruel than they had imagined. Even the innocent people were not spared. They thought of their previous judgment and discussion. Once again, they felt the coldness of the emperor's heart and the indifference to life. It's useless. I have strengthened the divine cage. You can't break it with your abilities. Dean's indifferent eyes glanced at the kings who had escaped more than a dozen miles away. His perception locked on their figures. Many of the kings had already tried to attack the cage in the sky, but this cage was tougher than they had imagined. Regardless of whether it was physical attacks or energy-based attacks, they were all absorbed. Even if someone managed to tear a hole in the cage, there was another layer of cage outside the hole. It was a despairing scene. Some kings tried to drill into the ground to escape. However, they found that the cage was also entangled by the silver threads. The cage was a complete sphere. Is your reason the same as Barton's? Dean didn't pay attention to the panicked kings. He looked down at Aurora. Aurora's eyes were red. Your Majesty, my husband has made a big mistake. I know that he's been schemed against by others. But if you know about it, you won't let him go. So I can only help them. I'm sorry. I only hope that I can use my life to exchange for a peaceful life for them, even if it's as an ordinary civilian. I hope that you won't be angry at them. At this point, the shadow behind her suddenly surged and turned into a sharp blade, piercing her heart from behind. Blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. Her heart had burst out with blood. Please give me a chance to avenge my sister. I have been longing for a family. My children are innocent. Your Majesty, I beg you." Aurora looked at Dean in sadness. Her eyes were full of despair as she looked at Dean's indifferent face. Dean stared at her like a statue. He stared at her like a statue. Even when he saw her eyes gradually lose focus, her aura gradually weaken, and her life gradually fade away, there was not a trace of fluctuation. She fell to the ground. Her body was completely dead. He didn't speak. Only the silver spider spear continued to shoot from the sky. However, the area within 100 meters around him wasn't affected by the attack. It seemed that the storm in the world had nothing to do with this place. "Family," he muttered to himself. "You don't tell me you'll only stop after you kill everyone here." A voice full of resentment and anger echoed from behind. The next moment, Du Annie's arms turned into scarlet sharp blades as she rushed towards Dean's back. Dean didn't turn around as if he didn't hear her. When Du Annie was less than 10 meters away from his back, a sharp blade that was as sharp as a sickle suddenly shot out from his back. With a puff, it pierced through Du Annie's chest and stabbed her in the air. "You!" Du Annie looked at him in a daze. The next moment, the strange energy attack from the sharp blade invaded her body. Her internal organs were torn. The pain made her beautiful face twist. Immortality, is it really that important? A face slowly emerged from Dean's back, quietly looking at the struggling girl in front of him. Du Annie writhed in pain, trying to break free from the blade, but there seemed to be a suction force inside the blade that kept her body firmly attached to it. As she struggled, she screamed in pain. "You're a monster! You brought us back to life just to satisfy your inner desires. Sooner or later, you'll kill us too." "Sister, you love me the most from childhood to adulthood. Why are you doing this?" Dean looked at her and asked faintly. Du Annie seemed to be burned by flames. Her whole body turned into hideous and ugly limbs, slapping and twisting on the sharp blade. She screamed, "Monster, go to hell!" Dean was silent for a moment. The next moment, Du Annie, who was struggling on the sharp blade, suddenly froze. Then she burst into countless pieces of flesh and splashed everywhere. "Sister won't hurt me at all. You are a failure." Dean indifferently glanced at the pieces of flesh on the ground. Then his eyes fell on his parents, who were trembling in fear. "You're also—" Whoosh. His body suddenly flew out, and the sharp blade danced in the air. "Run!" The father roared, and his whole body turned into light, shooting into the distance like a laser. But Dean ejected several sharp blades from his body, and they were even faster than the father. In the blink of an eye, they caught up with the father, pierced his body, and nailed him to the ground. "Failure! Failure!" Dean whispered like a devil. His sharp blades danced, tearing apart the body of his mother, who was ready to escape into the ground. Then he rushed to the front of his father, who was nailed to the ground. Several sharp blades turned into light, but there were other energy residues inside, tearing apart his father's body. After killing them, Dean looked up at the king, who was fleeing in panic in the distance, and rushed over again. The killing continued in the cage. One king after another screamed. Some were completely desperate. Seeing Dean rushing over, they directly knelt down and begged for mercy. But they were not spared and were directly obliterated. 10 minutes later, Dean stood in front of the last king. The king was kneeling on the ground, shivering. His face was full of tears. The armor on his head fell to the ground. He didn't know the face of a stranger. Dean was bathed in blood. Every sharp blade was dyed red with blood. The strong smell of blood gushed out, making the king almost suffocate. He desperately kowtowed and begged in a sobbing voice, "Your Majesty, I beg you. I'll do anything you want me to do. Please don't kill me. I beg you. Isn't it better to rely on my parents than to submit to me? Don't tell me that hundreds of kings have been caught by them." Dean slowly opened his mouth. This was the first time he spoke since the start of the massacre. The king on the ground knocked his head on the ground, his face almost touching the sand, and said in a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, they forced us. We were secretly trained by them. If we didn't listen to them, we would be punished by them. And Your Majesty, you are a god. We can't understand you. You can resurrect the dead. Our lives to you are as insignificant as dust. We also had no choice. Is that so? Dean said silently. Puff! A sharp blade fell and cut off the king's body. He was killed on the spot. The bloody wind blew gently and lingered around him. Within dozens of miles of the divine cage, no one was left alive, no matter if it was a king or a commoner. The buildings here were also destroyed. It was like a purgatory battlefield. Only he was left standing in this mountain of corpses and sea of blood. Chapter 1269. To the west of the dynasty, there was a giant wall. The giant wall was located in a remote mountainous area. It was far away from the capital. Even in the era of information sharing and trade between the giant wall, there was no railway track outside the giant wall. There was no beautiful tourist scenery. It was still overgrown with weeds, hills and swamps mixed in with the wilderness. For the people in the giant wall was their world. In the center of the world, the core of the giant wall, was the king's city. The majestic and imposing buildings formed a forest. In the center of these buildings was the most magnificent and towering palace. In the back garden of the palace, the garden was full of fresh flowers. One of them was a piece of sand. 2, 3, or 4-year-old children were lying on the sand. They were piling up sand to build a bunker. They were having a great time playing with the sand. Not far away from him stood a middle-aged man with an imposing appearance. He stood tall and straight with his hands clasped behind his back. He had a head of extremely pure blonde hair and was dressed in a black, form-fitting long suit that resembled a tuxedo. There were a few silver chain decorations embedded on it, making him look slightly noble. He quietly looked forward, gazing at the end of the horizon. The weather over the giant wall was clear. The sky was blue. However, at the end of the sky, there was a gray haze. It seemed that a rainstorm was sweeping. He silently stared at the sky and gradually lost in thought. No one knew what he was thinking. Lord of the Wall. A soft shout came from the back garden. It was a well-proportioned young man. His face was a little pale, and he looked a little panicked. He hurried to the middle-aged man's side and said, "Something has happened. Something big has happened." The middle-aged man awoke from his empty thoughts and slowly turned around. His expression was calm and without any ripples. He said, "What is it?" "Something big happened in the capital city." The youth's voice trembled. "There is a large number of kings in the capital city. They took advantage of the emperor's tour to attack His Majesty. I heard that the main participants seem to be His Majesty's biological parents. Now the entire capital city is in chaos. It is said that dozens of miles have been razed to the ground. Countless people have died." The middle-aged man was slightly startled. He frowned and said to himself, "Finally, this day has come?" The young man was surprised. "Sir Wall Lord, you already knew?" The middle-aged man slightly shook his head and was about to say something. Suddenly, a hearty voice came from outside the garden. "Noise, didn't you say that there's rose wine here? Where is it?" As he spoke, a burly middle-aged man walked in. His head was shaved bald, and the top of his head was shiny. At this moment, there were a few hickeys left by his red lips, which were very eye-catching. The blond middle-aged man was Noise. He smiled bitterly. "Sergei, clean your head first." Sergei touched his head and wiped a few lipstick marks on his hand. He didn't care. It's just a woman's love. What's there to be unclean about? Take out your rose wine and share it. Noise gestured to the young man next to him to leave. Then he sat down in front of a tea table in the garden. The tea table here was black and white in European style. It was usually used by the ladies to have afternoon tea in the garden. He casually poured a cup of tea on the table and said, "You're not in the mood to drink wine. Have some tea to calm yourself first." Sergei was stunned. "Calm myself? What happened? Don't lie to me." "Someone tried to assassinate His Majesty." Noise's voice was flat, but the words were shocking. Sergei's eyes widened. "Assassinate His Majesty? You're wrong, right? Assassinate which Majesty?" "Our young master." Noise lightly said. "Apart from him, who else is His Majesty?" Sergei was stunned for a moment. Then he laughed. "I thought it was a big deal. How can this be regarded as a big deal? Which idiot must be tired of living to actually try to assassinate him? Isn't this the same as trying to light a lantern in the toilet? Noyce rolled his eyes. The people who assassinated him are his biological parents. They're the ones who are now acting as the state's minister and his sister. If I'm not mistaken, Barton and Macon are also involved. Aurora and his student Edward are also involved. Sergei was stunned. After a while, he said, "Is there something wrong with your brain? Why are you talking nonsense? Why would his biological parents try to assassinate him? Barton and Macon were also drinking with him a few days ago. We're the first people to follow His Majesty. It's impossible for us to betray him. Why will we participate in it? Furthermore, don't they know how powerful His Majesty is? With just these few people, His Majesty could probably kill them with one slap." Noyce shook his head. "My information is a bit late. You are the leader of the Imperial Army. You can access the intelligence network of the dynasty. You should be able to find out the whole story from there." Sergei was startled for a moment. He immediately rolled up his sleeves and quickly entered a password into the watch on his wrist. After a moment, his face suddenly changed. He jumped up from his chair. His body slightly trembled. His head was covered with cold sweat. His face was full of disbelief. "How is it?" Noyce frowned as he saw Sergei's reaction. Sergei stood there for a long time before he slowly sat down. "You're right, the capital is in chaos. There was an assassination attempt, and it was led by His Majesty's biological parents. Barton, Macon, Aurora, Edward, and several others were involved. There were hundreds of kings on the scene, but all of them are dead." Noyce's eyelids twitched. Although he had already predicted it, his heart still trembled when he heard that there were more than 100 kings. But he soon calmed down. Although he was surprised, he guessed that it should be the case. Why? Why did they do this? Sergei asked. He couldn't believe that Barton and Macon, who had followed him, would betray Dean. He didn't believe that Dean's biological parents were the ones who took the lead. Noyce lowered his head and sighed. In the past 10 years, they have fought for the dynasty. Now, they have their own families and found their own happiness. Their lives are more comfortable than what they had imagined. They naturally can't accept being deprived of such a life. Sergei's body shook as he looked at Noyce. "What did you say? You didn't participate probably because no one was able to find you. They know that you have many women around you, but you're just playing with them. They can't use them to hold you hostage. Moreover, you don't have any children, so you don't have any weaknesses. So naturally you didn't participate." Noyce sighed. Sergei was startled. "Are you saying that they were forced? Since they have participated, there's no such thing as being forced. This is the path they have chosen. Unfortunately, they don't know how terrifying His Majesty's true strength is." Noyce shook his head with some regret. Sergei couldn't help but shout. "Are their brains broken? Did a pig kick their brains? What good would it do for them to assassinate His Majesty? Isn't the glory and wealth they have now enough for them to enjoy? Isn't their status high enough? His Majesty had given them as much as he could. Their parents are in charge of the dynasty. They aren't emperors, but they are better than emperors. Why would they take such a big risk to do such a thing? Why?" Noyce sighed. "The human heart is boundless. Acting emperors are still acting. You and I both know that His Majesty has the power of the Creator and can resurrect the dead. How could they not know this? Wouldn't they be worried that if they made a mistake, His Majesty would send them back to the furnace to be reborn? So they are really alive when His Majesty is dead." Sergei replied, "But His Majesty doesn't care about these things. His Majesty only cares about Miss Aisha. For His Majesty, power is just a tool for him to play with. He is tired of it." Noyce smiled. "But sometimes people may not think that you don't want it. You say that you didn't hit him, but the palm print is there. No one will believe you. Moreover, the mystery of becoming a god will fall into their hands if His Majesty is dead. Who doesn't want to live forever? Who doesn't want to live for 10,000 years? 100,000 years, or even 1,000,000 years? Even if the earth is destroyed, we can still coexist with the universe." "But," Sergei said, "Goddess is still alive even if His Majesty is dead. She regards His Majesty as her own parent. How can she not avenge His Majesty?" "Do they want to kill a god?" just by relying on them. That's why Goddess Wall wasn't present during the operation. As far as I know, she left the Earth half a month ago and went to outer space to play. I think she got an order to go to outer space to do something. That's why she hasn't returned yet. Noyce said in a low voice. If the assassination is successful, when she comes back, they can take the place of His Majesty's corpse and weave a set of memories for His Majesty's corpse. They can then use His Majesty's corpse to control Goddess Wa. So, they deliberately lured Goddess Wa away? Otherwise, how would they have the guts to act? Sergei opened his mouth and finally let out a long sigh. Stupid. Why do they have to think so much? Aren't good wine and women good enough to attract them? Why don't they know how to be content? Noyce looked at him, then turned his head towards the two children playing in the sand. Do you want to play with them? Sergei was stunned. He turned around and saw two children piling up sand to build a castle. He couldn't help but laugh. I'm talking to you about something serious. Who has time to play with your children? The two children were naturally Noyce's. He didn't get angry when he heard this. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, You also know that this kind of thing is too childish, so you won't do it. This matter can't attract you, but it can attract them. Similarly, what you think is interesting now, perhaps in their eyes, is as childish and ridiculous as these two kids building a castle. How can they enjoy it like you do? Sergei was stunned. There are very few people in this world who have the same hobby. Everyone loves money. It's not because of the charm of money, but because money can buy different things. Money is just a channel. Noyce slowly said, different experiences, personalities, preferences, and pursuits. You can't understand them, and they naturally can't understand you. So naturally, they can't understand His Majesty. Why? Sergei was surprised. Because His Majesty is God, and we are humans. How can humans understand God? People can only imagine God, guess at God, try to figure out God, but never truly understand God. At this point, Noyce sighed. However, we are social animals. We always need a leader. The leader is the only one, the supreme one. Only he can see the scenery at the top. When he gets the world, he is destined to lose it and separate from the group. He is like a sheep leading the way, a horse pulling a carriage. People can only see his back. Isn't ascending to the peak the same as walking into a dead end? Sergei's expression changed. Do you mean that in His Majesty's eyes, all of our thoughts and pursuits are as boring as a pile of sand? Perhaps. Is this the reason why we have fewer friends as we grow up? When you are a grain of sand, you will form a desert. When you are a stone, you will form a mountain. When you are a bird, you will form a flock. Noyce paused. But when you become a bird, you will no longer be accompanied by sand and stones. You won't appreciate them. They won't understand you. They won't understand that you were once a grain of sand or a stone. They will only think that you were born a bird because you don't have the same characteristics as them. If you don't meet a flock of birds, you will only be a lonely bird. If you don't meet other stones, you will only be a lonely rock in the desert. Sergei was silent. He wasn't stupid. He already understood. He looked at the tea in the cup in front of him. The tea leaves were swirling as if it was his fate. He asked, You seem to have known that all of this would happen? Noyce shook his head. I just had a hunch. I didn't think that would really happen. Even if the tiger is docile and protects the dog will be afraid and bark at it. Sergei was silent for a moment. Then he sighed and said, You're right, but it's a pity. The world is at peace now, but the capital was destroyed. More than 100 monarchs died. What a huge force it was, but it's self-destructed. Noyce shook his head. The sand castle can be rebuilt. The chessboard can be rearranged. Even if we don't start a new game, we can restore it. The only thing that worries about the chessboard is not the player but the pieces. The one that worries about the castle is not the child but the sand. His Majesty is the one that is playing chess. He is the child that builds the castle. Sergei was startled as he thought of Dean's ability. He understood Noyce's feelings. The castle might be precious for the two children who were playing in the sand. But if it was destroyed, then they would cry or get angry. They could rebuild it. After all, it wasn't the child's life. But to them, this was their fate. Creation. Is this the ability of God? I feel that it is more like the ability of the devil. It is an ability that shouldn't exist in the world. Who would care about life if they have it? Sergei muttered to himself. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve at his in-laws' house. The day would pass early, so he would have to stop writing for one day. The day after tomorrow, he would come back and continue writing. If he couldn't finish writing, then he would have to stop writing for 2 days. Then he would have to go back to his hometown for the wedding. Chapter 1270. I'll be taking a bus back to my hometown tomorrow. I'll be free the day after tomorrow, so I can write. I'll be getting married the day after that. I'll probably be drinking a lot on that day. I might be free the day after that. Kings of Darkness leave slip includes recent itinerary, currently typing. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 1271. Whether it is God or devil, they're not us mortals. Since we're not a race, how can we get along? Noyce indifferently said, I will appreciate the flowers in the garden and carefully take care of them. For these flowers, I am the god, but you will not appreciate them. You will break the branches or trample on them because they are a hindrance. So you are the devil. But in the black snow season, when the world is cold and everything withers, I will bury them into the ground and turn them into fertilizer for the next year. I will not build a nursery for them because they are, after all, just ornaments. When the flowers bloom next year, I will still be their god. We don't really care about these playthings, but these playthings naively define us on their own, worshiping gods and hating devils. Little do they know that we are the same race, that we are a family. Who do they think they are to judge us so presumptuously? Sergei was startled. He couldn't help but look at Noyce. In this aspect, you are the most thorough. After all, I used to be the person who followed His Majesty for the longest time. I don't know how long ago His Majesty had expressed the same meaning. Just like Sylvia's holy church. Light and darkness. The world thinks that they are opposite to each other, but they don't know that they are one. Poor people are fools. Noyce sighed. There was a touch of bitterness in his mouth. Even if he knew these truths, it was difficult for him to escape from them. After all, he was a fool. Sergei sighed. You are right. I admire His Majesty the most. He has no one to rely on. He has to rely on himself to climb to his current position. All the nobles and dukes in the dynasty think that His Majesty is a cruel and merciless devil. But look at the civilians living at the bottom. They like this era. Everyone can step out of the giant wall and live freely. Perhaps others will think that His Majesty is cruel and tyrannical. This is indeed an undeniable fact. But how many people have improved their lives because of His Majesty? When the origami invaded, who saved the earth? When the origami and the demonic insects were enslaved, who broke the situation? Although His Majesty doesn't consider himself as a savior, but he did what a savior should do. But people think that the savior is too high. They think that the savior is a hero. All his actions are absolutely righteous. But how can absolute justice split the world of darkness? How can the sharp light completely dispel the darkness? Even the sun can't shine on the back of the earth. That place still has to bear the fear of the night. Noyce nodded. Darkness can't be dispelled, just like light can't be extinguished. There will always be heroes, but they are just decorations in this world. The vast universe is dark. Although the stars are brilliant, the darkness is eternal. Only children yearn for peace. Mature people only seek relative and superficial peace because that is very rare. Sergei sighed. It's a pity that all the killings and sins were borne by His Majesty, but no one will remember his good deeds. Perhaps only the ordinary people will thank him, but their gratitude is too weak and powerless. His Majesty doesn't care about gratitude or not. Perhaps the world's gratitude and the world's hatred doesn't make any difference to him. Noyce shook his head. Not many people will care about what he pursues and cares about. Sergei smiled bitterly and said with nostalgia, I really hope that His Majesty can return to the time when he was in Sylvia. At that time, he was more or less stained with human emotions. But now he is more like a cold god. Noy's mouth twitched as he thought of the last conversation with Dean. Some things can't go back. Yes, we can't go back. Sergei sighed. Noyce looked into the distance and muttered to himself. Everyone will choose the path that they think is right. Everyone will grow and change themselves. The environment will change. The ideals and pursuits of the past may change because they have to adapt to the current living environment. They have to change and abandon it. No one would think that they were on the wrong path, and no one would think that their current way of thinking was bad. Even if they occasionally noticed it, they would know in the depths of their hearts that it was because there was nothing they could do about it. That was because if they wanted to survive, they would have to work hard to maintain the way they were. When we change, it means that we have to abandon our previous selves and abandon our previous wrong thoughts. Everyone knows that we shouldn't keep walking on the wrong path, so we will keep searching for the right path. What's regrettable is that we keep searching, but we never know which path is the right one. Saints can't teach us about this. They can only teach us the stereotypical model of morality. However, the world is complicated. You can't just rely on the word morality. The longer you live, the further you go. So it doesn't matter if it is right or not. In the end, we will find the one that suits us. If it suits us, then it may be right. If it is right, then it will not change. Sergei was startled. No wonder you came to this remote, giant wall 10 years ago. We couldn't see through you at that time. At that time, His Majesty had just ascended the throne. But you gave up everything and lived in this remote and desolate place. Now, I'm the only one living in the imperial capital. Others were blinded by greed. Some were forced into the whirlpool of war. They couldn't extricate themselves and ended up like this. You have chosen the right path, and it is the most suitable path for you. There is no right path. Noyce looked at the two children in the distance. There was a trace of doting color in his eyes. Even I feel that today's days are too comfortable. I can't eat or sleep in peace. The war in the imperial capital hasn't spread here. But in the future, this place will not be spared. I just hope that day will come later. Sergei was startled. No. Will His Majesty vent his anger on us? With His Majesty's means, it should be easy for him to know our details. We are clean. Moreover, after this incident, His Majesty will not condone such things again. His Majesty will naturally not blame us, but others may not. Noyce looked at him. We are the closest people to His Majesty. I don't know how many people are eyeing our position. They want to replace us and become His Majesty's confidants. Since they can't bring down His Majesty, then they will bring us down. Serving under His Majesty is our greatest pursuit. Sooner or later, the power struggle will penetrate here. Perhaps it has already begun, but we haven't been aware of it yet. Sergei's face slightly changed. With our strength and status, it is impossible for them to assassinate us. Assassination is naturally difficult, but others can use His Majesty's hand to kill us. For example, they can create some opportunities to make His Majesty suspicious of us. Then they can use some means to make His Majesty misunderstand us. Isn't there a chance? Noyce gently smiled. His expression didn't seem to care, but his words were enough to make people shudder. Sergei was startled and couldn't speak for a while. He wasn't afraid of open swords and spears, but it was impossible to guard against the conspiracies hidden in the dark. Is there no way? Sergei couldn't help but put his hope on Noyce. Noyce shook his head. We don't need to think of a way. What kind of person is His Majesty? His Majesty will naturally consider what I said. Instead, He will use us to lure the snake out of the hole. No matter who instigates the relationship between us and His Majesty, He will kill them. After this incident, it is impossible for us to betray His Majesty. How can His Majesty not understand this? Sergei was stunned for a moment. He sighed and said, That's what I said. His Majesty is wise. You almost scared me when you said that it was dangerous. Noyce chuckled, but there was some bitterness in the corner of his mouth as he said, His Majesty is naturally wise. Looking at all the countries in the world, even the first emperor of the Huaxia dynasty, who is known as the first emperor of all ages, couldn't compare to our Majesty in terms of great achievements. Even if we give him a map of the world and let him unify the world, He is only the emperor of the human race. He can only call himself the Son of Heaven. What is the Son of Heaven? The Son of Heaven. That's why the emperor has to worship the heavens. On the other hand, His Majesty has not only unified the entire world, He has also unified all the systems. He has also solved the external threat of the human race, banished the demons, and defeated the alien invaders, such as the origami and the demonic insects. Just these achievements alone have far exceeded the scope of an emperor. Moreover, His Majesty has evolved to the point where he's almost like a god. His Majesty is no longer an emperor, but a god. If the ancient emperors are the Son of Heaven, then our Majesty is the heaven. Heaven. Sergei was startled. That's right. His Majesty is close to the level of God. He is indeed not comparable to an ordinary emperor. In this way, we don't have to worry too much. If there is any danger, His Majesty will solve it in advance. The smile on Noi's face slowly disappeared. Of course, heaven is more noble than the Son of Heaven. But what is heaven? Huh? Sergei was puzzled as he did not understand. Heaven is fair. Noi stared at him and said, whether you are beautiful or ugly, noble or lowly, you can't escape death. Whether it is the barren swamp or the flourishing city, when the rainy season comes, everything will be wet. The heavens will not give you extra care because of your prayers, nor will they punish you with lightning because of your evil curse. Heaven is high above the clouds, overlooking all living beings, not moved by the joy of living beings, nor will it care for the misery of living beings. When there is a drought, rain will not fall on you because of your pity. When there is a flood, it will not stop because of the destruction of your home. Heaven follows the rules of heaven. The happiness and anger of the world have no effect on it. If you beg, then it is just a coincidence. After all, the world is full of suffering, and there are tens of thousands of people who beg. There will always be a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. That is heaven. Sergei was startled. After a long time, he reacted. His face turned ugly. You mean His Majesty will become as ruthless as the sky? Noyce didn't answer directly. No matter what, His Majesty always has his own considerations. We only need to follow the rules of His Majesty. Don't think too much about it. At least we are at peace now. The future is too far away. To pursue eternal peace is an extremely cruel war. Isn't it the most ridiculous thing in the world to pursue peace through war? Writing a chapter in the middle of the night. Tomorrow morning, I will pick up my wife. M. Chapter 1272. But all peace is bought by war. This is something that cannot be changed. We can't change the will of His Majesty. Sergei sighed. After a while, Noyce whispered, indeed, this is something that cannot be changed. Just like how we will be destroyed, there is no way to stop it. Living in this post-apocalyptic world, who can escape from the sea of bitterness? Climb ashore and go to the thorn prison. Destroyed? Sergei frowned. What do you mean? Noyce gently leaned on the chair as he looked up at the blue sky. He felt that the clouds were floating very fast. It seemed that a large number of people were gathering here. He faintly said, in the past, I always thought that I could get rid of the predicament and end the suffering by relying on my own efforts. But after I went to prison, I realized that there are many things that you can't change. Sometimes you don't have to deal with one person, but the system that has lasted for hundreds or thousands of years. Moreover, you have to deal with the entire empire, even the civilians of the entire empire. When you want to change, you have to destroy everything. If you don't want to change, then you can only be destroyed or assimilated. You will become the least prominent person in the crowd. Noyce paused for a moment. After I got out of prison, I followed His Majesty and grew up. Now I have climbed to the status of a king. My vision has expanded from a small giant wall to the whole world. I thought that all the suffering would leave me and I would have no worries in this life. But later I found out that I was wrong. I am no different from the weak prisoner who was trapped in the giant wall of Sylvia. My power is monstrous. I am powerful, but I will eventually die. I will die of old age or be killed. From a moment of birth, the countdown to death is the truth of life. What a sad and pitiful thing. No matter how much you struggle, no matter how brilliant you are, no matter how sorrowful you are, once you die, you will be forgotten by others. Even if someone knows your name and it is passed down for hundreds of generations, what is the point? Who are the people who remember your glorious achievements? Are there any despicable thieves? Rapists? Low moral pariahs? If so, what's there to be happy about being remembered by these people? Sergei scratched his head and said, "Listening to you, I feel that you are like those poets and literati. All day long you're either praising life or discussing the meaning of life, living or dying." The meaning of life? Noyce looked at him and chuckled. The meaning of life is meaningless. Whether he was alive or dead, what was the difference? When all life reaches the end, it will be destroyed. Then, new life will be born from the destroyed corpses, and it will continue to struggle and reproduce. In the end, it will still reach the end of destruction. Meaningless? Sergei shook his head and said, "Aren't those literati going to vomit blood when they hear this? Aren't they just trying to make a living by studying this? I think it's quite interesting. Only the weak will be destroyed, not all of humanity. The strong won't be destroyed. It's just a matter of time." Noyce chuckled. "As long as there is desire, the doomsday will not stop. Humans will continue to roll in this meat grinder. Eventually, the boiling blood will be spilled, the delicate skin will be completely twisted, and the hard bones will be chewed until they turn into a pile of rotten meat. That's the final form of the meat grinder. Can this form still be considered as alive?" Sergei was startled. His mind wasn't as rough as it looked. He had already understood the deep meaning behind Noyce's words. He suddenly felt a chill. As long as there is desire, the doomsday will not stop. He repeatedly thought about this sentence in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more he trembled. Whether it's the old era or now, the doomsday has never stopped. Noyce didn't care about Sergei's expression as he continued. The doomsday represents death. Where there is struggle, there will be death. Where there is desire, there will be struggle. This is an unsolvable cycle. From the birth of life, we are destined to struggle in the doomsday. We have to work hard to survive. We have to raise our heads to live. However, when we can finally live and enjoy our hard-won dream life, can we still maintain our purity? The saints teach us to restrain our desires. The law forces us to restrain our desires. Everything tells us that desire is the root of destruction. But the saints didn't teach us how to live after restraining our desires. The law doesn't tell us how to protect ourselves after restraining our desires. One step forward is the abyss of hell. Stop, it's still the same. If you retreat, the thorns behind you will pierce your heart. We can only move forward and look for hope. Hope is like a fish in front of us. We are greedy cats. We are always chasing, but we can never eat it. Sergei's face turned ugly. He couldn't help but interrupt Noyce. Can't His Majesty escape? His Majesty has no desires. He's like a god. Can't he escape the whirlpool of the doomsday? Noyce looked at him, as if he had seen through his thoughts. Noyce's tone became indifferent. Do you think that you can jump out of the doomsday after becoming a god? But you don't know that His Majesty is the one in the deepest part of the whirlpool. He is beyond redemption. He is already dead. Even if he becomes a god, how can he be the original him? The doomsday has already crushed him into powder. No matter how you put it back together, you can't find his original appearance. What's the difference between you and being dead? Sergei was stunned. Becoming a god. Can't he be free? He felt a slight pain in his heart. It was difficult to breathe. Noyce's eyes flashed. His Majesty is not without hope. Maybe only that girl can put His Majesty's original appearance back together. You mean Miss Aisha? Sergei's pupil shrank. Half a year after the rebellion of 100 Kings, the imperial capital had been rebuilt on a large scale. But the number of nobles living in the imperial capital had gradually decreased. They were worried that there would be more assassinations, and they would be implicated. Aurora, I heard that there is news about Aisha from the Corpse Kingdom in the north. In the rebuilt palace, Dean was sitting on the throne. He was wearing a black robe with golden embroidery. He indifferently looked down at the graceful woman in the hall. Aurora respectfully replied, "Your Majesty." The corpse king said that he had seen Miss Aisha's figure from another corpse, but the specifics need to be investigated. M. Chapter 1273. Investigate immediately. Dean's face was indifferent. Ever since he issued the search notice, there had been a lot of news about Aisha every year. But after a detailed investigation, none of them were true. Aurora didn't care about Dean's cold attitude. She was still respectful as she turned around and left. Not long after she left, a king by the name of Blood Noble came to the main hall. He was a newly promoted king and had been given the title of Marquis. In the past, kings were peak figures that surpassed even dukes, but now, being able to get the title of Marquis was already quite outstanding. "Your Majesty," Blood Lord respectfully saluted. Dean didn't look up as he read the information in his hand. "What's the matter?" Blood Baron respectfully replied. "Your Majesty, I got news that Miss Aisha you were looking for appeared in the vicinity of Yenze Mountain. The hunting adventure group said that they saw someone similar to Miss Aisha, but they didn't see it clearly, so they can't be sure." "Yenze Mountain?" Dean slightly raised his eyelids as his eyes fell on Blood Baron. His cold and dark eyes seemed to penetrate the deepest secrets of Blood Baron's heart. "Yenze Mountain is under the jurisdiction of the giant wall of Havana. Since you know about this, why don't you go to the leader of the giant wall of Havana to investigate and report to me?" Blood Prince felt that his secret was exposed in front of Dean. He was embarrassed. "Your Majesty, I have sent people to inquire, but the leader of the wall refused to cooperate with our investigation. I don't want to use force. Although he is a small leader, but he is a relative of your Majesty. I'm afraid of offending him." Dean raised his eyebrows. "Are you saying that Noyce refused to cooperate with you?" Blood Lord bowed. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Dean looked at him, but didn't say anything. He raised his wrist and revealed a black watch. He quickly contacted the other side. "Noyce, I heard that there are traces of Aisha near Yenze Mountain. Do you know about it?" "Your Majesty." Noyce's voice came out of the watch. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. "I've heard about this and sent people to investigate. It was confirmed that the news was false. Someone was mistaken. I've severely punished them. I didn't expect that His Majesty would be alarmed." Dean nodded. "I heard that Blood Lord had sent people to investigate. Are you not going to cooperate?" Blood Baron's body slightly trembled. He didn't expect Dean to confront Noyce in such a straightforward manner. Dean didn't beat around the bush and didn't beat around the bush. Noyce seemed to have expected Dean to say this. "Your Majesty, the Blood Baron has sent people to wantonly destroy my territory on the grounds of investigation. I'm sorry I can't cooperate." Dean was silent for a moment. "Noyce, you should know what she means to me. I hope you don't lie to me." Noyce replied, "Your Majesty, I won't lie to you about this matter. Miss Aisha is your Majesty's benefactor and also my benefactor. I'll be the first to find her even if I have to go through water and tread on fire." Dean didn't say anything more as he hung up the communication. He looked at the Blood Baron who was about to say something. "Come here." Blood Lord's body trembled. "Your Majesty, the Wall Lord is lying. He refused to cooperate. I didn't mean to slander him. It's true." Dean raised his hand, and black silk threads shot out from his palm. They wrapped around Blood Lord's body and pulled him in front of him. Blood Lord didn't dare to struggle. He kept begging in fear. Dadian pierced a soft tentacle into his forehead. Blood Baron's body stiffened and soon stopped moving. His eyes stared blankly, and his face was sluggish. After a moment, he recovered and saw that the black silk around his body was loosened. His heart was relieved. "There's nothing wrong with my memory. He did stop you, and the news about Yenze Mountain is true." Dean whispered as if he was talking to himself, but his cold eyes were always on Blood Baron. "You got the news and went to report after being stopped by him. All of this makes sense, but there seems to be something wrong with your memory. Is it missing a blank? Has it been adjusted?" Blood Lord, who had just relaxed, narrowed his eyes. His hair stood on end, and he felt as if his soul was about to leave his body. He hurriedly shouted, Your Majesty, I puff. Before he finished his words, his body suddenly exploded, and the flesh and blood splashed all over the hall. The next moment, Dean's body divided into a large number of small blood vessels, like a straw, and the scattered flesh and blood were sucked into his body. Everything returned to its original state, and not even blood was left. Dad? A figure floated in from outside the imperial palace. The figure was pretty and lively. It was Goddess Wa. Under Dean's instruction, she had changed the way she addressed Dean. Goddess Wa looked around. She seemed to see the scattered flesh and blood on the ground. Dad, did someone make you angry? Dean's eyes fell on her. There was a trace of softness in the depths of his eyes. Goddess Wa was absolutely loyal to him. No, I won't be angry because of these little things. Dean smiled. He reached out and stroked Goddess Wa's soft hair. His gentle eyes flashed. Child, are you willing to do anything for your father? With an innocent look, Goddess Wa giggled and said, Of course, I'm willing to do anything you want me to do, Dad. Anything? Dean stared at her. Yes, anything. Goddess Wa blinked at Dean. Dad, are you in trouble? Dean was silent. I've encountered a problem, and I can't find a solution. I can't find hope, and I can't see the future. That's why I need your help. Can I help you? Goddess Wa blinked her eyes expectantly. Of course. Dean's mouth moved slightly. He looked up at her with gentle eyes. Have you forgotten that God is omnipotent? Goddess Wa tilted her head. But Dad, you have studied my body for years. You said that my body isn't perfect enough. I can't be regarded as a real God. I'm just a false God. I don't have a life core. Yes, Dean whispered. I used to think that I was limiting your growth as you were just a young God. But later I discovered that a true God is omnipotent. There is no distinction between young and old. There is no distinction between time and space. God is everything. If you were a true God, then you would be able to assimilate the earth. Even if you fall into the depths of the sun, you wouldn't be hurt. But you need to accumulate great power to barely reach it. Holding his hand, Goddess Wa couldn't help but ask, Dad, if I'm not a true God, can I still help you? Dean's body slightly trembled as he bowed his head. It should be possible. Great. Goddess Wa clapped her hands and cheered like a child. It seemed that she didn't care whether she was a true God or a false God. She only cared whether she could help Dean or not. As long as it's useful to Dad, then Dad will need me. Goddess Wa grinned. The last few chapters. Chapter 1274. Havana Giant Wall. A slender young woman stood by the window of the castle and looked at the tall, blonde man beside her. She said with a worried expression, His Majesty just contacted you. Do you really intend to hide this matter? The blonde man was Noyce, and the young woman beside him was his wife. She gave birth to 2 clever and lovely children for him. Although she wasn't of noble birth, he didn't find fault with her at all. He couldn't help but sigh deeply after hearing this. He withdrew his gaze from the gloomy sky outside the window and turned to look at the beautiful woman. The light shone on her black hair and made it look like it was flowing. A tender feeling arose in his heart. He wanted to take her away from this place and live on an isolated island that no one would ever set foot on. But he knew that this was an extravagant wish. Today's technology was more advanced than that of the old era. Their individual strength was also more powerful. Their footprints were spread all over the world. There was no place for monsters and naturally no place for him. He was in a whirlpool. Trying to escape would only tear him apart. I'll die if I'm exposed one day, but you and the children will be fine. I know him. Noyce sighed. I don't understand. Didn't you say that His Majesty loves this girl the most? In order to find her, he's like a madman and doesn't hesitate to kill millions of people. This is his reverse scale and can't be violated. With your relationship with His Majesty, even if you offend him in other things, he will forgive you. Why do you hide her whereabouts? Once His Majesty knows, even you can't bear his anger. The woman's eyes were red, and she couldn't understand his thoughts. She couldn't understand his thoughts. Noyce sighed. It's not difficult for someone of my status to live a peaceful life. But if the world is destroyed, where will we find shelter? Although I'm just a nobody, if I can save this world, even if I have to sacrifice my life, I'm willing to do it. Why would the world be destroyed? Isn't it all fine now? All the monsters have been repelled. The monsters in the sea have been killed, and they don't dare to come close to the land. Why are you worried about these impossible things? The woman's face was filled with grief. Although she questioned him with every sentence, her voice was still soft and gentle. However, the more she spoke, the more tears flowed down her cheeks. Noise smiled bitterly. The monsters were repelled, but they also nurtured the greatest devil. The power of the world fell into the hands of one person, but this person was already tired of life and ignored it. He could destroy it at will, but he could also create it at will. It all depended on his mood. How terrifying is this? However, in this world, there will always be one person who wants to be the king, and the rest will have to crawl and submit. Isn't that the purpose of all wars? The woman looked at him blankly. To become the one and only king, we have already shed the blood of our compatriots. Now that His Majesty has unified the world and there is no more civil war, why do you oppose such a thing? Whether we are united or not, will the war never leave us? The bitterness on Noi's face was more intense, as if there was a yellow lotus in his mouth. Life is destined to fight since birth. We need to plunder other lives to eat and drink. The existence of life is meaningless, but we have been born. Since we can't choose to live or die, we have to find a way to live our own meaning or live comfortably. There is no threat if the world falls into the hands of others, but His Majesty is different. He is not a human. His heart is close to that of a god. We can't let him find that girl. All the news and clues about her must be erased. Once His Majesty finds her, it will be the end of humanity. The woman was dumbfounded and stammered, "Why?" Because that is the last of his humanity. Noi sighed. His voice revealed infinite exhaustion. And human nature will change and decay. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Huge sailboats could be seen everywhere along the coast, as well as an endless stream of adventurers. The sound of bugles and sails could be heard one after another. Huge steam tankers sailed into the sea, and the footprints of humans gradually invaded the mysterious world of the sea. On the other side of the continent, the most prosperous city in the world, rose flowers covered the ground. A large number of sightseeing trains followed the railway tracks to the capital of the imperial city. Outside the imperial palace in the center of the imperial city, there were groups of tourists watching from afar and taking pictures. Dean and a group of scientists were in front of a miniaturized version of the particle collider in the National Research Institute behind the palace. They were observing the data report. There were no undeads in the laboratory, but a variety of high-energy physics research equipment. Your Majesty, the only way to reverse time is to find the broken wormhole in the space. But we can't pinpoint the specific time. A gray-haired scientist said to Dean. Dean frowned and didn't speak. A youth came into the laboratory. He was the assistant of the top laboratory. He saluted as he saw Dean. Your Majesty, an apostle is looking for you. Dean's eyes stayed on the particle collider in front of him for a moment. He looked at the old scientist. No matter how much resources you invest, I want to see you come up with something new in a month. The scientist's face slightly changed. He didn't open his mouth to complain as Dean turned away. He didn't give him a chance to refute. Your Majesty is possessed. He wants to travel through time and space. Another scientist shook his head and sighed. The resources in our laboratory are already at the top. It's useless to have more resources. Your Majesty is making things difficult for us. Forget it. Being in the king's company is like being with a tiger. Let's hurry up. Dean came to the study room and saw a figure in a black robe waiting for him. Dean sat on the chair next to him. What's the matter? The apostle in front of him was a newly established institution. It was dedicated to serve him. It penetrated into all levels of the dynasty and monitored the world. Your Majesty, there's news about Miss Aisha. The apostle bowed his head and said. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt as if all the air in the room had been sucked out. There was an inexplicable feeling of suffocation. His originally tense heart beat twice uncontrollably. His face turned slightly pale, and his heart was filled with shock. Although he knew that this great emperor's martial strength was the best in the world, he didn't expect it to be even more terrifying than he had imagined. It had far exceeded the concept of king. "Are you sure?" A low and slightly hoarse voice came from above. The air seemed to turn into a sharp sword that pierced the body of the black-robed man. "Where is she?" "Your Majesty, we found her at the grass giant wall. We have confirmed that she is waiting for you there." The black-robed man suppressed the trembling in his heart and said reluctantly. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt that the suffocating air in the room suddenly disappeared. It was as if the ancient ice on his body had suddenly melted. He couldn't help but be startled. He looked up, but he didn't see Dean in front of him. Tomorrow they will return to Shanghai. Chapter 1275. Grass Giant Wall. Located in the coastal area, the flow of people was dense and bustling. It was one of the paradise for adventurers and businessmen. This place was close to the sea. The entrance fee for tourists and adventurers was comparable to the income of several months in other cities of the Giant Wall, not to mention the taxes on goods traded here. It was an astronomical figure. It was so huge that it was enough to make the king envious. In 2 days, it will be our giant glass wall's sacrificial sale festival. Ina, look, this is the orchid dragon jadeite of Rant Giant Wall. It is a specialty of that place. The natural golden silk inside is said to be insect eggs. Insect eggs? That's disgusting. I want roses. Well, I will buy roses for you. Roses are much cheaper than orchid dragon jadeite. Well, I want Chinese redbud roses. This is 100 gold coins. Are you willing to spend it? Of course. For you I am willing to do anything. People were coming and going in the streets of the Giant Wall. A few years ago, the festival was coming. The city was very lively. Small wooden boat figurines were hanging on the side of the street lamps. A figure floated in the crowd. He was inconspicuous, but if you noticed him, you would never be able to move your eyes away from him. The figure passed by the couple on the side of the road and suddenly stopped. His eyes fell on the purple rose in the girl's hand. Each petal of the rose had a complex pattern. It had a noble and mysterious feeling. This was the most expensive and the rarest variety of rose. "Purple," the figure murmured. "What are you looking at?" The girl noticed that the strange eyes were staring at the Chinese redbud rose in her hand. She raised her eyebrows and said with slight displeasure. The youth next to her gently smiled and said, "Ina, don't be angry. I guess he also wants to buy a bunch of Chinese redbud roses for his girlfriend. But he doesn't have the money. After all, there are not many people like me who are willing to spend 100 gold coins to buy a bunch of roses." "That's true." The girl heard the words and showed a sweet smile. She was very satisfied with the rose. "Boss, here are the Chinese redbud roses. Wrap them up for me." At this moment, the unfamiliar figure next to them spoke. His voice was very gentle, and he had a smile on his face. He did not seem to care about the couple's words at all. The florist looked up at him and said with a smile, "You want a bouquet too?" Redbud roses cost 100 gold coins per bouquet. I don't bargain here. "Wrap them all up," the stranger said with a smile. As soon as he said that, whether it was the florist or the couple next to him, they were all stunned. They looked at him in astonishment, as if suspecting that their ears were playing tricks on them. You want all of them?" The florist was stunned. The stranger took out a golden card and said, "Swipe the money from here." "Gold card?" The florist took the card. He was a little curious. He had only seen a silver card and a black card. The highest level card was a red card. It was made by a big shot in the grass giant wall. This was the first time he had seen a gold card. "I have 1,423 Chinese redbud roses here. I'll give you the change. It will cost 142,000 gold coins. Are you sure?" The florist looked at the stranger suspiciously. Even the nobles wouldn't spend more than 100,000 gold coins to buy roses as gifts. After all, roses were disposable and would soon wither. Redbud roses were considered as luxury goods. All of them. The stranger smiled again and nodded. The florist thought for a moment. He took the gold card and swiped it on the machine. He didn't want the other party to go back on his word. then he would have to suffer for nothing. When the gold card was swiped on the machine, the florist suddenly found that there was no password set on the gold card. The balance interface flashed, and he saw countless zeros. The florist was stunned. The stranger put away the gold card and waited quietly with a smile. The couple next to him saw that the stranger actually paid more than 100,000 gold coins for the roses. They were speechless. The girl suddenly felt that the bouquet of Chinese redbud roses in her hand was a bit shameful. She even wanted to throw it away and run away. Soon the florist had wrapped all the Chinese redbud roses. He politely said to the stranger, "Do you need us to help you? It's inconvenient for you to carry so many." The stranger didn't wait for him to finish his words. A few arms sprang out from under his clothes and held the roses. He lifted them a few meters above his head to avoid being messed up by the crowd. Then he quickly left the florist's shop. The man stopped when he passed by a clothing store. He thought for a moment and then entered the clothing store. When he came out again, he had changed into a very handsome black and gold suit. It was a noble and gorgeous temperament. He combed his hair neatly and put on a formal suit. He held the roses and walked towards the inner city of the grass giant wall. The streets were crowded with people. There were also many noble carriages with gold inlaid carriages. If ordinary people were playing together, once they let go of each other's hands, they might not be able to find each other again. They could only contact each other by means of communication. However, in his perception, he could still clearly sense that familiar aura despite being separated by a vast sea of people, countless figures, carriages, and buildings. It was like a red lantern waiting for him there. He couldn't stop the smile on his face. He was extremely excited and happy. He was unprecedentedly nervous. Even if it was the coronation ceremony, he could keep calm. But at this moment, he was so excited that he couldn't help but want to jump and walk. In a bustling old Chinese restaurant, a girl in a purple cheongsam was sitting on the third floor. The environment here was relatively quiet. The noise of eating and drinking downstairs was not so noisy. She was leaning against the carved railing. Her snow-white skin and beautiful cheeks were extremely eye-catching. It attracted the attention of other diners on the third floor. But everyone could see that this woman was not an ordinary girl. There were a few dishes and 2 jars of wine on the table in front of her. She only drank wine and didn't eat. Wine and water were the only human food that she could swallow. But wine tasted better than water, because the wine got hotter and the water got colder. She still remembered that there was once a person who liked to give her wine. During that time, he had been accompanying her. She didn't know how to face that person or herself, so she could only drink. She drank mouthful by mouthful. During this process, her thoughts seemed to stop and she didn't think. Suddenly, her eyes narrowed. The next moment, she suddenly sat up straight. Bang! The wine bottle in her hand fell to the ground. The other peeping diners on the third floor were shocked. They thought that they had been discovered and immediately lowered their heads to eat. But she didn't even look at these people. She just stared blankly at the end of the street. The purple color was especially eye-catching in the crowd. As it approached, the most eye-catching thing was the person under the purple color. That familiar face. Why is he here? She suddenly panicked. She looked left and right, wanting to find a place to quickly escape. But soon, her rationality made her quickly consider the current situation. The other party was most likely here for her. She couldn't hide. And should she continue hiding? Looking at the face that was brimming with smiles, she was stunned. Tears suddenly flowed from the corners of her eyes. That silly smiling face no longer had the murderous aura of a monarch. She covered her mouth. Her shoulders twitched lightly. Tears fell like rain and stained her cheeks. The figure in the crowd also seemed to have noticed the beautiful scenery in the tavern. His eyes became even more excited, and his footsteps involuntarily quickened. He squeezed through the crowd around him, but it seemed that he wasn't fast enough. His body flew up into the air. As soon as he flew up, the crowd exclaimed. No one had expected that someone would be bold enough to fly in the giant grass wall. This was a violation of the grass wall's laws. However, no matter how many exclamations there were, they didn't attract his attention. His eyes were only focused on the breathtakingly beautiful figure in the tavern. A pair of pure white wings appeared on his back, and flapped gently. He was like an angel holding a large number of Chinese redbud roses as he flew to the third floor of the tavern. The two of them were only separated by a railing. They looked at each other silently. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. All the sounds seemed to have faded away. Chapter 1276. Dean stared at the girl in a daze. It seemed that time had not flowed the slightest trace on her body. She was still as young and beautiful as he remembered. Even the fragrance exuded from her body was so nostalgic. This familiar smell instantly brought him back to that era. Do you remember me? He trembled, but found that his throat was dry and hoarse. He was so nervous that he seemed to be unable to speak. He used to be calm in the face of millions of lions. He managed hundreds of millions of people indifferently. But now in front of her, he seemed to have taken off all his defenses. He was so nervous that he was at a loss. Hearing Dean's words, more tears flowed from Aisha's eyes. According to scientific research, the undead had no tears. They had no lacrimal glands or emotions. Even if they were born with a second consciousness, they only had thinking consciousness, but not human emotions. But at this moment, her tears flowed like running water. Those few words were like raindrops hitting her heart. The memories that accompanied her were in her heart bit by bit. How could I not remember you? Dean didn't wait for an answer, but he had already seen the answer from her tears. His heart was agitated. At this moment, he didn't care about anything else. He crossed the fence and hugged her. Her slender and delicate body was still as cold as ever. This coldness reminded him that she was still an undead. But could an undead shed tears? Even if she was an undead, so what? As long as he could see her, he already felt that it was a gift from God. He hugged her tighter and tighter. He almost wanted to integrate her into his body. He wanted to pass the heat from his chest to her body and warm her cold body. He wanted to smell the fragrance of her hair and engrave it in his heart. He wanted too much. The two quietly hugged each other. No words, but it was better than 1,000 words. On the third floor of the pub, many diners cast their eyes. Some were jealous, some were envious, and some were gloating. Downstairs of the pub, many busybodies gathered, pointing and talking, waiting for the law enforcement to come and punish this arrogant person. Many local residents of the grass giant wall looked at him with sneering eyes. It seemed that they were looking at a foreigner who didn't follow the rules and was about to be taught a lesson. A long time passed. Dean and Aisha separated from each other, although their minds were on each other, but their powerful senses were still disturbed by the noise around them. Dean held Aisha's soft hand. His eyes were as gentle as water. Let's go. I'll take you to a place where no one is around. I have a lot to say to you. Aisha gently nodded and said, I also have a lot to say to you. In the distance, a team of law enforcers rushed over. Under the expectant eyes of the people on the street, they flew to Dean's back, but they didn't yell at him. Instead, they knelt on one knee in the air and bowed. Greetings, Your Majesty. Greetings, Your Majesty. Now that all the giant walls were connected to the internet, naturally, there was a monitoring system. The monitoring system would identify Dean's identity at the first moment. The law enforcers gathered in a hurry to pay their respects. In their minds, this great emperor had been living in the imperial palace for a long time and rarely came out. He was in charge of the lives of the people in the world. Even a giant wall like glass was nothing in front of this great emperor. How could they dare to neglect him? Dean didn't respond to such greetings. In his eyes, there was only the beautiful woman beside him. She slowly flew higher and gradually disappeared from people's sight. On the ground, many busybodies were shocked when they heard the voice of the law enforcer paying his respects. They didn't expect that this daring person was actually the legendary great emperor who drove away the demons and unified the world, who was almost like a god. For a time, a large number of civilians knelt down on the street and cowed out. They didn't get up for a long time. Above the clouds, there was a flock of thunderbirds hovering. Dean held Aisha's waist in his hand and flew to the back of a leading thunderbird. This thunderbird's wings were more than 10 meters long. Its back was enough for a dozen people to lie down. At the moment, it let Dean land. It didn't dare to resist. It lowered its speed and slowly flew forward. "These flowers are for you." Dean handed the bauhinia roses to Aisha and said softly. Aisha glanced at them and then moved her eyes. The tears in her eyes had been wiped away. Her eyes were full of tenderness. Flowers are what every girl likes. "Although flowers are beautiful, I would rather look at you than waste this time to watch them." Dean slightly pursed his lips. "I finally found you. I won't let you leave me again. You will have time to see me every day, every moment, every minute. We will see each other for the rest of our lives. 100 years, 1,000 years. I will make you a god. You will live forever." Aisha shook her head slightly. "It's too difficult to become a god. It's fine as long as we are together." Dean gently smiled and didn't continue. Instead, he asked, "Your memory seems to have recovered. Where have you been all these years? Don't you know that I'm looking for you?" Aisha slightly bowed her head. There was a bit of guilt in her eyes. "My memory is quite chaotic. I just straightened it out recently. I know that you are looking for me, but I dare not let you find me. I'm already an undead. I know that you are studying a way to restore the undead, but there have been no results in all these years. I know that I can't go back. I don't want you to see my ugly appearance now." Dean was startled. After a moment of silence, he slowly held her little hand. "Whether in my heart or in your eyes, you are the most beautiful. You will never be ugly. Whether in appearance or in heart, you are the most beautiful and the most kind." Aisha looked up at him. Her body slightly shook. She slowly lowered her head and gently leaned her head on Dean's chest. She looked at the clouds and whispered, "When I came to the grass giant wall, I guessed that you might find me. I am both afraid and looking forward to it. I can't tell what it is. Since you can't tell, don't think about it. We will always be together, forever." Dean hugged her shoulders. The tip of his nose was touched by her hair. It was a little ticklish, but it was particularly comfortable. "We were together for less than 2 years before you became an undead." Dean looked at the blue sea and blue sky in the distance. He only felt that the accumulated depression in his heart was released. His whole person became happy. "But in order to find you, I have been looking for you for almost 20 years. Now that I have finally found you, I will never let you leave my sight again. I will never lose you again." Aisha softly nodded and didn't say a word to each other. The Thunderbird slowly flew forward. The more it flew, the farther it flew. Happy Valentine's Day. A saying mobile phone reading address. Chapter 1277. The capital of the dynasty was thousands of miles in diameter. Just the imperial city in the inner ring was equivalent to big cities like Beijing, Tokyo, and New York in the olden era. Looking down from the sky, the imperial city was like a huge square imprint in the center of the capital, branded on the ground. Countless people raised their heads to look, but it was still difficult to see the splendor of the imperial city. The imperial city was very empty. There weren't many imperial guards, but they were all abyssal-level powerhouses. The captains among them had reached the level of the Lord of the Abyss. Their perception ability was enough to cover half of the imperial city. There were hundreds of Lords of the Abyss guarding the imperial city. Even if a grain of sand fell into the imperial city, they would be able to detect it. Although the imperial city was big, it was empty. The imperial palace in the center was incomparably huge, comparable to a city district. The palace was towering and majestic, extraordinary in style, as if it was the residence of a deity. Even the cold and cheerless feeling it gave off made it seem like the residence of a deity. A flock of purple thunderbirds came from the sky and flew into the imperial city. The imperial guards who were guarding the imperial city were about to stop them, but they stopped when they sensed the unfathomable aura of the thunderbird at the front. Wherever the thunderbirds passed, everyone bowed their heads in worship. This was the majesty of a king. It was also the pressure of God. Whoosh! Dean floated down with Aisha in his arms. They landed on the steps in front of the imperial palace. He turned around and looked at the vast square that could accommodate millions of troops. "I've been waiting for your return here." Dean looked down at the world and whispered to the person beside him. Aisha's body trembled slightly. There was an indescribable, complex color in her eyes. She lowered her head so the man beside her didn't notice. When she raised her head again, the emotions in her eyes had converged. She took a deep breath, grabbed Dean's arm, and whispered, "I don't want these things. I just want you." Dean smiled and stroked her head. "Fool, I'm not stupid." Aisha pouted. She was a bit playful, but also a bit serious. Dean smiled. "Yes, of course you're not stupid. I'm the one who's stupid." Aisha stared at his eyes and slowly lowered her head. "You are not stupid." A gentle breeze swept over from the plaza. There was no obstruction, so the wind grew stronger and stronger. By the time it reached them, it had already become a violent gale, causing the two's clothes to flutter. "Let's go in. I have a lot of things to tell you." Dean protected her body and slowly walked in. Although the cold wind would not make them feel cold, but his movements were still gentle, as if he was caring for a weak, ordinary person. Arriving at the Imperial Palace, Dean led her to a huge palace. "This is for you. It has been empty for a long time. Now it has an owner." Aisha looked up, lost in thought. After a long time, she slowly withdrew her gaze and said, "I want to go to the old Sylvia to take a look. I heard that you didn't tear it down, but rebuilt the Imperial City on it." "All right, Sylvia is on the west side of the Imperial City. I didn't change the layout there. It's still the same as before." Dean laughed. "Now the people of Sylvia are the most distinguished people. I heard that the temper of the people living there has become bigger." Aisha didn't speak, but accompanied him slowly. The two came to the west side of the Imperial City. The towering giant wall was still towering. A high wall was built outside the giant wall to separate the giant wall from the Imperial City. The giant wall was the inner city of the Imperial City. It was the closest to the Imperial City and also the closest to Dean. The people inside the giant wall had adapted to the changes. There were no more poor people and refugees. All the families had a carefree life and were well-dressed. The aristocrats relied on their advantages and status to vigorously develop the industry. They expanded the business territory to other giant wall and became famous tycoons in the dynasty. But the aristocrats knew that they couldn't touch some taboos. Most of the children of the aristocrats moved out of the giant wall. They operated and lived in other industries of the giant wall. Sylvia's giant wall was like a home for them, but also like a holy land. Dean changed his appearance. He draped a veil over Aisha's head and strolled with her in the city. The sighing wall still existed. The appearance of the city hadn't changed much, but some old houses had been demolished. Most of them were new houses. Even the outer wall area was luxurious and lively to the extreme. "It's a big change," Aisha murmured. Dean nodded. "Although I forbade them to rebuild the city, but some people have money. They will repair their houses and make them more gorgeous. It looks more pleasing to the eye. The air isn't as smelly and messy as before. But that kind of air feels more real." Haisha whispered. Dean was startled. "You are right. I'll let them dismantle all these and return to the original appearance. I'll forbid them to leave the giant wall and keep it closed like before." Haisha quickly said, "No, it's a waste of manpower and money. The price is too high. But such a giant wall is not to your liking. It's nothing. Things will always change. People are the same." Aisha looked at the pedestrians coming and going in the street. She could no longer see the poor people in coarse clothes. They were all wearing silk cheongsam or mink coat. The city was still there, but the people had changed. Dean heard her words and realized that he was negligent in this matter. His heart was filled with regret. There weren't many things that could make him regret. Even if some important people died, he could recreate them. But he didn't want to use this ability on her. If it was an ordinary person, he could even erase the memory of the other person and wait for Sylvia to be restored to its original state. But he couldn't do it in front of her. "At least I haven't changed." Dean stared at her. It seemed that he wanted to use his eyes to tell her all his feelings. He had never felt this kind of feeling. At this moment, it was like he had taken off all the gorgeous armor and become an ordinary person. He was a young man who had fallen in love. Aisha nodded and smiled. I know. Dean relaxed as he saw her expression. He accompanied her to continue to play. Dean took her hand and wandered in the garden of the palace. Now that you are back, I want to hold a wedding for us. Are you willing to marry me? Very willing. Aisha didn't have the slightest shyness, nor was she moved to tears. She just gently embraced his arms. Very, 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 very willing. Dean felt his body and heart melt at the same time. He hugged her tightly. The new book had been released secretly. It was good to see a few familiar faces. King's ending today. There would be an epilogue tomorrow. It would put an end to all the thoughts. Chapter 1278. Night. The stars were like a river, and the moonlight was bright. Dean and Aisha were sitting on the roof of the highest building in the imperial palace. The glass-like tiles were very smooth. They were sitting side by side on the arched roof. The night breeze caressed their faces. It was very quiet. They had a panoramic view of the vast imperial palace downstairs. At the end of their line of sight, there were thousands of bright lights. I had to separate from you when I was kidnapped by Crimson Moon. Otherwise, you would have been caught by her as an experimental subject. Dean's arm gently hugged her body. His fingertips touched the cold skin of her arm. He slowly talked about his experiences over the years. After escaping from the clutches of Crimson Moon, I left Sylvia and went to the border. I strayed into the Federation. I thought that I had carefully concealed my identity, but that Lin Chongsheng from the Federation is an extraordinarily intelligent person. He had already noticed me when I first entered the Federation, but he had always treated me as a lab rat to observe. I fell into his hands and became an experimental subject. After the invasion of the Demon Emperor, there were some changes in my body. Even I didn't know that I had given birth to a god. No, to be precise, she was just a false god. She was not a perfect life form. She lacked a body core. She was just a life evolved from my heart. The thing that she was lacking happened to be in my body. If I let her eat me, she could become a real god. Dean told her about the past word by word. He directly ignored some of the trivial things. He would only share them with her if he found them interesting. However, there were too few interesting things in his life. On the contrary, suffering and pain occupied most of his life. I killed Lin Chongsheng. I defeated the Demon Emperor. I subdued the Qilin King. The Corpse Emperor of the North also surrendered to me. The dynasty was established. I unified the world, but I wasn't happy. I was looking for you every day. I searched everywhere. I dug 3 feet into the ground. I went deep into every corner of the land. I even sent people to search some of the remnant islands in the sea. Finally, I found you. Dean turned his head. There were some vicissitudes in his eyes, but it was full of gentleness. He gently held her slender hand and passed the warmth of his palm to her palm. I was thinking about how to crack the undead virus every day. Even when I'm sleeping, my subconscious is thinking and experimenting in my dreams, but in the end, they all failed. I can only list the research of The Walking Dead as the second experiment. The new experiment number 1 is to study time. If I can study the mystery of time, I can travel through time and return to the past. That way, I can stop all tragedies from happening. It can be said to be once and for all. Currently, there are no obvious results from my research, but I believe that as long as I continue to research, in 10, 20, 100, or even 1,000 years, I will definitely be able to develop a time travel machine. Aisha listened silently, but her eyes had become hazy. She seemed to be able to see the stubborn figure chasing after a figure. Even if he got the world, he didn't yearn for wealth and enjoyment. Instead, he buried himself in the laboratory and racked his brains. The persistence and suffering was like a flood blocking her throat, making her unable to speak. Is it worth it? After a long time, she finally opened her mouth. Her voice was hoarse and trembling. Dudian laughed heartily. It seemed that all the haze had gone with the wind. It's worth it. Of course it was worth it. Now that I've found you, everything is worth it. If it wasn't for you, I would have drowned in the heavy rain when I came out of the freezer. My body would have rotted on the streets of the slums and been cleaned up. If it wasn't for you, I would have been killed by the king of corpses. Maybe there wouldn't be any bones left. If it wasn't for you, I don't know what I've been struggling for all these years. Right? Immortality? In my opinion, it's boring. If I can go back to the day when I crawled out of the freezer, I would rather exchange everything I have now. But time is the most rigid in the world. Even if I spend all the wealth in the world, I can't reverse even a second of time. Aisha was silent. Dadian seemed to be aware that what he said was too sad. He immediately changed the topic. Speaking of which, where have you been for so many years? How did your memory recover? Do you remember everything? Aisha stared at him and shook her head. My memory gradually recovered about a year ago. I don't know why I recover my memory, but from the recovered memory, I seem to have wandered to a sea. I ate some flowers and leaves there. Then it seems that my memory slowly awakened. But my memory isn't perfect. I can't remember many things when I was a child. I seem to remember that I have a sister, but I can't remember her appearance. I can't remember the appearance of my parents either. I only remember that I was constantly hunting and killing monsters. I remember that when I was a child, I sneaked out of the inner wall and met you. I've forgotten a lot of other things, but I remember you very clearly. Everything about you is as vivid as if it had just happened yesterday. Dadian was stunned. You recovered your memory after eating some flowers and leaves? He couldn't believe it. He had gathered all the top scientists in the dynasty to study for more than a decade. Even the origami and the demonic insects were helpless. How could it be solved by a few small flowers and leaves? Were these flowers and leaves a special mutation of the environment? If that was the case, then there was a bit of a possibility. Although scientific research was advanced, but some natural synthetic things couldn't be explained by science. For example, his heart had transformed into the god of Wa. Even if the god of Wa was born, he couldn't use science and technology to replicate the cells of the god of Wa. Do you remember your memories after you became an undead? Dean looked at her expectantly. He didn't spend much time with Aisha. The time he spent with her was far more than the time when she was a human. Although Aisha didn't say a word when she was an undead, but every time he thought about it, he would miss that time. Aisha's cheeks reddened. I remember some, but it's not comprehensive. Dadian was interested. What do you remember? Tell me. Aisha glanced at him. She was a bit shy, but she was used to being generous. She quickly recovered. I remember you took me back to the giant wall. You took me through the mountains and through the wasteland. You took good care of me and served me. You helped me clean as long as the environment allowed. I also remember that you didn't want to get hurt. You would rather do it yourself than let me come forward. I also remember that you didn't let me eat raw meat. You didn't want me to evolve too fast and mutate my body. I also remember that you talked with me every night. You didn't know what fatigue was. Even if I didn't say a word and didn't pay attention to your words, you would always chat with me until dawn. I also remember. Her voice gradually choked with sobs, and she spoke slower and slower. Those memories and images, countless days and nights of companionship, the two of them in the wilderness. The man beside her would always make some humorous jokes to tease her from time to time, but the response she received was always the cold self who had become a zombie. Although there would never be a response, but the man would always smile and talk to her. Perhaps the most romantic language in the world was the companionship. The most touching action in the world was giving without asking for anything in return. Dadian rubbed her hair and pulled her into his arms. He pillowed his face on top of her head. He smelled the fragrance of her hair and whispered, "It's all in the past. The future will be very good." The next chapter is tonight's big finale. Although I see many readers who wish for a happy ending, since I've been stubborn for so long, I might as well continue to be stubborn. Don't vent your anger on the new book. I'm sure you'll be able to collect a lot of tickets. Chapter 1279. The next day, Dean sent people to summon all well-known astrologers and diviners. They gathered in the hall of the imperial palace. He asked them to calculate the date of the wedding according to his and Aisha's birthdays, constellations, names, ages, and other conditions. Although he didn't believe in these things, but he was in a good mood. He hoped to receive the blessings of the world. He handed over these things to others. Although they had to abide by the customs, and the process was cumbersome, but it could increase his joy. After the astrologers and diviners went to calculate, Dean called his own disciples to go to the place that Aisha said to find the strange plants that could cure the undead. Dean returned to Aisha's palace after everything was done. He was inseparable from her. The date of the wedding was soon set. Half a month later, Dean calculated the time. The rainy season hadn't passed yet. He asked the weather station. There was no heavy rain in half a month, and the weather was sunny. Most of these were under the investigation of the astrologers. But the weather might not be completely accurate. After all, the wind and clouds were unpredictable. The entire imperial city was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. The streets were decorated in advance to celebrate the general amnesty. Other criminals in the giant wall also benefited from the light. All those sentenced to less than 100 years were pardoned. Death row prisoners were also converted to fixed-term imprisonment. Only some vicious thugs were still detained in prison. They didn't see the light of day. But when the imperial edict was spread all over the world, everyone knew that the mysterious and powerful emperor had finally found the lover he had been searching for many years. Although Aisha didn't appear in front of the world, but the impression of her wasn't unfamiliar to people. Even if some people had forgotten about her, but when people turned over the announcement to the world, they quickly remembered. It's finally coming. In an old castle in the giant wall of Havana, a slender middle-aged man in a black suit looked into the distance and sighed. There was sadness in his eyes. In the imperial capital, many influential families had been secretly preparing to give gifts. Usually the emperor was stubborn and couldn't be flattered. But now it was a heaven-sent opportunity. Even if they had to bleed a lot, they had to do their best. As the grand wedding was being prepared, the undercurrents of countless dignitaries and tycoons were surging and fighting in the shadows. Your Majesty, we went to the place you mentioned, but didn't find any flowers or rocks. The apostle who went to look for exotic plants returned to the palace and reported to Dean. Dean's eyes twitched as he stared at him. Are you sure? The apostle only felt as if the surrounding air had instantly solidified. He felt a shivering fear, as if there was an evil dragon glaring at him from above. His heart pounded crazily, as if it was about to jump out of his throat. He said with a trembling voice, Your Majesty, this subordinate has investigated repeatedly. It is absolutely true. Was it destroyed by sea monsters? Dean frowned and muttered to himself. The apostle hesitated for a bit, and then said in a low voice, Your Majesty, we also thought of this. Later on, we investigated the nearby sea region, as well as visited the nearby exploration teams that often take risks. They all said that there were no islands there before. Shut up, Dean shouted. Puff. The apostle's chest seemed to be hit by something. He slid back a distance and spat out a mouthful of blood. He crawled on the ground. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of fear. He even forgot to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He hurriedly kowtowed. This subordinate deserves to die. This subordinate deserves to die. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Get out. Dean angrily rebuked. The apostle didn't dare to stay any longer. He quickly retreated out of the palace hall. Dean's face was gloomy. He sat on the throne. His eyes flickered as if he was thinking. His fingers unconsciously pinched and made a clicking sound. After a moment, he seemed to make up his mind. He suddenly stood up and disappeared from the hall. Dozens of minutes later, over the Bohai Sea, the vast, deep blue sea was endless. There were some giant corpses floating on the surface of the sea. They had been dead for a long time. The corpses were swollen and rotten. A large number of seabirds were gnawing on them. In the distance, a giant ship was faintly visible. In the deep blue sea, some shadows could be vaguely seen moving along with the waves. If one did not look carefully, one would think that they were shadows moving along with the waves. But in fact, they were ferocious shadows swimming past at high speed. A strong, fishy smell came along with the sea breeze. The destruction of the sea monsters to the marine environment was no less than the pollution of the land by human beings. Now the sea was incomparably stinky. No one knew how much blood had been soaked in it. Huh. Dean looked around, but didn't see any islands. He dived into the sea with a calm face. Suddenly, he saw a shadow swimming in the depths of the water. 100 meters away from him was a slender, snake-like shadow. It was more than 10 meters long, and it was swimming toward him. Dean didn't even bother to pay attention to its face. He looked elsewhere. Before the sea monster came close, he ejected a slender blade from his arm. Puff! The blade hit the sea monster's head. The remaining force didn't reduce. It completely cut open its body and dismembered it on the spot. There is no island base. He frowned and kept sinking to the bottom of the sea. More than 10 minutes later, a figure broke out of the sea, setting off huge waves. He suddenly stopped in midair and then rushed toward the distance like a cannonball. As soon as he flew out of the sea, the waves fell, and a large amount of blood gushed out like lava from a volcano. Then, a large number of sea monster corpses floated to the surface of the sea and sank with the waves. The sea was dyed red. The day of the wedding was getting closer and closer. The most mainstream news channel broadcast the wedding process every day. Many dignitaries who were rarely seen on weekdays also showed up. There were also some popular stars from all walks of life who expressed their congratulations. Many people were competing for the wedding invitation cards. But these invitations were destined to be sent to the hands of some dignitaries with real power. The others could only watch from the outside. Dean handed over all the matters to his subordinates, while he took Aisha to play around every day. They strolled in the imperial capital and the giant wall. After visiting some famous tourist attractions, they strolled in the wilderness, reminiscing the past. On this day, Dean and Aisha were eating local delicacies in an extremely well-built restaurant in the giant wall that was dedicated to tourism. Aisha also ate with relish. Although her body was still an undead, Dean used his power to help her construct a new human sense of taste and stomach. Moreover, he added a layer of protective film outside these tissues so that it would not be infected by the virus inside other organs. In terms of eating and drinking, Aisha could once again experience the joy of being a human. We will get married in 3 days. We really don't need to look at the process. What if we don't know anything at that time? Wouldn't it be shameful? Aisha used a small spoon to eat the jelly-like delicacies in front of her. Her face was flushed with joy and worry as she said to Dadian. Her words were filled with a little girl's charm. After these days of getting along with Dadian, she had unloaded the coldness and straightforwardness of the goddess of war. She had become more gentle and beautiful. Dean looked at the heartfelt smile on her face. There was a trace of trance in his eyes. After a while, he smiled and said, "I know the process. Even if we want to learn, we can go to the rehearsal on the last day. It's not complicated. What difficulties haven't we experienced? Are you afraid of this little thing?" Aisha stuck out her tongue. "I haven't been so nervous in the face of monsters. I'm here." Dean smiled and reached out to hold her little hand. He seemed to think for a moment. "Your memory recovery is a bit strange. I want to see the specific reason. Are you willing to let me look at your memory?" Aisha was startled. It seemed that she didn't expect Dean to suddenly make such a request. The smile on her face slowly dissipated. She slightly frowned and looked straight into Dean's eyes. "Are you doubting me?" Dean's heart suddenly twitched in the face of her pure eyes. He faintly felt that he seemed to have done something wrong. But the worry in his heart had to be solved. Otherwise, it would always be a knot in his heart. He took a deep breath and said seriously, "I'm not doubting you. I've sent people to look for the exotic flowers and grasses you mentioned, but there was no island there. I suspect that there is a problem with your memory. If so, I'm afraid there is something hidden about your memory recovery." Aisha stared at him for a moment and slowly nodded. "Your consideration is reasonable. If there is a problem with my memory, I also want to know what is going on. You can check it out." Dean breathed a sigh of relief, but there was an inexplicable sense of loss in his heart. Seeing that she was ready, he no longer said anything. He reached out and gently stroked her forehead. A sharp tentacle pierced into her forehead and connected to the memory. In that instant, A large number of memories flashed before his eyes like flickering lights and passing shadows. Dean saw the time when Aisha was born. From birth to adulthood, she was busy all her life. She worked hard for the family and shouldered the duties of a saintess. But she was repeatedly framed by her sister. He also saw himself in her memory. He saw the memory after he became an undead. Although the undead had no consciousness, the eyes of the undead were like cameras. They recorded her life. At this moment, he could read it. Soon, Dean saw the island in Aisha's memory. After collecting exotic flowers and grasses, her consciousness recovered. The second consciousness after becoming an undead was defeated by the recovered memory until it was completely occupied. Then he saw that she was sometimes awake and sometimes confused. She shuttled through the mountains and wilderness. Later, she met adventurers and inquired about the current human society. She also inquired about his existence. But because of shame, she didn't want to step into the human city. She had been living in the wilderness. A lifetime of memory was seen in an instant. Dean raised his hand. He felt like he was dreaming. He had watched for decades in Aisha's memory, but only a very short time had passed in reality. He focused his mind and slowly sorted out the fragmented memories and some of the more blurry ones. These blurry memories were caused by the trauma and could no longer be clearly remembered. Aisha slowly opened her eyes. There was some confusion in her eyes. Her expression was somewhat similar to Dean's. She was inexplicably stunned. After a while, she reacted and converged her expression. "What's wrong?" Although Dean was sorting out Aisha's memory, his mind was still on Aisha. He noticed her strange expression and quickly asked. Aisha looked up at him. Her eyes were a little absent-minded. After a while, she returned to normal. She shook her head. "Nothing. Maybe I feel a little uncomfortable." "Have you finished reading? Did you find any doubts?" Dean saw her ask and shook his head slightly. "I've finished reading, but I haven't found any obvious doubts. But there are a lot of things that are worth scrutinizing and doubting. But you have lost a lot of memory, so I'm not sure." "Oh." Aisha's mood was a little depressed. Dean quickly comforted her. "I'm not sure about other things, but there is one thing I can be sure of. You are you, the real you." Aisha was stunned. "What?" Dean smiled but didn't explain in detail. He thought that he was the only person in the world who had the ability to create things. It seemed that he was the only one who had the ability to create things. This interlude passed quickly. Dean continued to take Aisha to play around. But Aisha's mood was obviously not high. Although she smiled at Dean's smile, but it was obvious that she agreed with him. "Is there something on your mind?" Dean asked her. There was a trace of regret in his heart. He rashly looked at her memory. If it was a subordinate or other people, then he didn't need to care about other people's feelings. But Aisha was his lover. Even her memory was looked through. There was no privacy to speak of. It was a very disrespectful behavior. Aisha slightly shook her head and didn't speak. Dean took her to play for a while. He saw that she wasn't in a good mood, so he didn't wander around. He took her back to the Imperial Palace. Aisha was silent during dinner. Dean found a few jokes to tease her, but only got a far-fetched smile in return. It made him feel uncomfortable and entangled, but more remorseful. "Can I choose the venue for our wedding?" Aisha suddenly said after a long silence. Dean was startled as he saw that she was finally willing to speak. "Of course, this is the wedding for you. You can do whatever you want." "Really?" Aisha looked at him and avoided his eyes. "I don't like such a sensational wedding. It feels like a monkey show. I just want to be quiet. Only the two of us are together. Is that okay?" Dean was stunned as he didn't expect her to make such a request. He thought about it and realized that he was the one who arranged the wedding. It seemed that he didn't consult her opinion. He didn't expect that she didn't like such a wedding. No wonder she was nervous these days. He felt guilty and wanted to slap himself. He said, "Of course, as long as you like it. I'm doing it for you, not for the world. But the invitations have been sent out. It's okay. I can solve it with one word. They won't dare to say much nonsense." Dean said in a domineering tone. Men like to show their strength in front of women. He was no exception. Aisha stared at him. The light was reflected in her crystal-clear eyes. She whispered, If one day I ask you to give up the power in your hands, would you be willing? Dean laughed. Of course I would be willing. Didn't I tell you that the whole world can't compare to your finger? If I can make you smile, then what about the whole world? Aisha stared at his eyes for a moment. She lowered her head and moved the chair to his side. She gently leaned her head on his shoulder. I owe you too much. I will never be able to repay you. Then you will repay me for the rest of your life. Dean hugged her. I will make you a god. Aisha didn't speak again as she quietly snuggled up to him. The night was quiet, but it was very warm around the two. The wedding wasn't canceled, but Dean and Aisha didn't participate. The nobles were still present to drink and celebrate. They weren't surprised as they got the news in advance. Instead, they were happy and harmonious. Even the opponents who had been fighting with each other raised their glasses at the moment. The luxurious wedding was broadcasted live all over the world. Countless boys and girls looked at the dreamy picture. They felt as if they had fallen into the river of love. However, the two main characters of this wedding were in a desolate and uninhabited wilderness. There was a group of volcanoes here, but they were all extinct volcanoes. There was no grass growing here. There were no monsters living here. Adventurers wouldn't come here to explore. It was very quiet. At the mouth of one of the tallest volcanoes, two ant-like figures were strolling while holding hands. In addition to the desolate ground, the scenery here was very beautiful. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Dean accompanied Aisha for a walk here. They were dressed up today. Aisha wore a Chinese-style Cheongsam wedding dress. It was bright red with purple embroidery. Her snow-white skin made her more beautiful. She wore a golden phoenix crown on her head. It was inlaid with top-grade, deep-sea gems. It was extremely luxurious. Dean, who was holding her hand, no longer had stubble on his face. Not only that, but his appearance had also changed greatly. From the original middle-aged appearance, he had changed back to the appearance of teenager. He had sword-like eyebrows and bright eyes. He was wearing a custom-made suit, looking elegant and handsome. If there were only 2 of us left in this world, would you feel lonely? Aisha looked at him with a gentle smile on her face. Her eyes seemed to be able to melt water. Dean showed a handsome smile and said, As long as you are here, I won't. I think so too. Aisha smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. She was very attached. Dean also stood quietly, like a pillar for her to lean on. It seems that you haven't formally proposed to me. Suddenly, Aisha raised her head and said. Dean was stunned and couldn't help but laugh. But soon he straightened his expression and straightened her body. Then he took a step back and knelt on one knee. He raised his head at a 45-degree angle and looked up at the beautiful and gentle face. Miss Aisha, will you marry me? While talking, he took out a box from his suit pocket and took out a unique special ring from it. Aisha's eyes stayed on the wedding ring for a moment and then shifted to Dean's face. Her eyes were slightly misty, but soon she took a deep breath and suppressed the tears that were about to overflow. She smiled and said, I'm willing. I'm very willing. Dean smiled. He felt that he had never been so happy in his life. He reached out and covered her delicate hand. He bowed his head and carefully put the wedding ring on her finger. When he looked up, he saw Aisha's happy expression. She was holding back her tears. Dean's eyes were gentle as he whispered, I love you. I love you too. The tears in Aisha's eyes burst out. She threw herself into his arms. She wrapped her hands around his neck and hugged him tightly. I really love you. I love you very much. Dean didn't expect her response to be so strong. His heart was touched. He hugged her tightly and said in a serious tone that he had never used before in his life, I love you very much too. I will never let you down in this life. After that, he felt the weak figure in his arms tremble slightly. Aisha slightly opened her mouth. Her voice was sobbing in Dean's ears. Dean thought that she would say, I love you too, but the next moment he heard, I'm sorry. He was startled. Then his body suddenly froze. He trembled slightly and reached out to touch the center of Aisha's back. He only felt a cold, hard object stained with warm slurry. He raised his palm and saw that his hand was full of blood. A protruding giant blade pierced out from Aisha's back and extended 2 or 3 meters long. It completely penetrated her slender and weak body. The handle of the giant blade had penetrated through Dean's back. This giant blade penetrated both of them at the same time. You? Dean stared blankly at Aisha's sword. His mind went blank, and his thoughts were numb for a moment. I love you, but I have to do this. I remember everything. My family, my sister, they're all dead. In order to resurrect me, you have killed too many people. I can't bear such a sin. I would rather die than see you become like this. Dean held her in a daze. Listening to her words, he suddenly felt a tearing pain in his heart. It was as if his soul was being torn apart. The pain went into his bone marrow and almost suffocated him. You have recovered all your memories, so you want to kill me? Dean clenched his teeth. The world in front of him was red. His blood seemed to be frozen, but also seemed to be boiling. Would a person's blood solidify or burn? He hadn't shed tears for many years, but at this moment, he felt that his eyes were moist and hazy. Aisha hugged him tightly and kept saying, I'm sorry, but Dean's mind was still stuck in that sentence. You remember the family that sent you. You remember the sister that framed you. You remember the countless people that I have slaughtered. So, you think I deserve to die? Even you think I deserve to die? Dean looked up at the sky and wanted to laugh, but no sound came out of his throat. His face looked hideous, but there was infinite sorrow and despair in it. Everyone is afraid of me and wants me to die. My parents want me to die. My friends and partners want me to die. Now, even you think that I should die. Ha! Ha ha! Dean looked up at the sky and laughed silently. The more he laughed, the harder he laughed. But the more he laughed, the more tears flowed out. The world in front of him seemed to have lost its color, leaving only black and white. I deserve to die. If this is what you want, then what if I die? He slowly raised his hand and gently straightened Aisha in his arms. He held her cheeks with both hands and looked at her tearful face. The despair in his eyes seemed to radiate some brilliance. His gaze was extremely gentle, still as sincere, passionate, and filled with boundless love and affection as when he proposed before. He softly said, If this is what you want, just tell me. I've said before that I'll agree to any of your requests. Aisha sobbed, I'm sorry, I've failed you. I'll accompany you on the road. I won't let you be lonely. If there is reincarnation, I'll be your bride again in the next life. I'll live an ordinary life with you, silly child. Dean gently moved her hair away from her forehead. You always live for others. It's too hard. Aisha cried and shook her head. She once again hugged him. Hey! Suddenly, a strange laughter rang out at an untimely moment. Aisha was still crying in Dean's arms, but she coughed up blood from the corner of her mouth. On the other hand, Dean was standing tall. His expression was the same as usual. It seemed that the giant blade of fear was stabbing someone else's body. He slowly raised his gentle eyes when he heard the strange laughter. In this short period of time, the gentleness in his eyes had gradually changed into the coldness of hell and a monstrous, murderous aura that was difficult to look directly at. This murderous aura was like a substance. The sun above their heads was oppressed and dimmed. They saw a spaceship parked hundreds of meters in front of them. There was a long tail of clouds behind the spaceship. The spaceship was like a shuttle. It was made of silver-gray metal. It was inconspicuous. At the moment, a burly man with a height of nearly 3 meters was flying outside the spaceship. His face was full of strange lines. It was the totem tattoo that the residents of the Fire Dragon country liked in the past. It's really touching. The burly man made a strange sound. Dean's dark eyes became as deep as the vast and silent starry sky. There was no trace of light. It was full of crazy and oppressive cold, killing intent. Flaming magic insect? Is this your plan? Haha, yes. The burly man laughed and said, Otherwise, why haven't you found her? We found her a long time ago and hid her. By the way, she recovered her memories on her own. She recovered all her memories from the beginning and knew about your crimes. At that time, she wanted to commit suicide to atone for your crimes, but we saved her. Really? Tell me about your plan. Dean lowered his head. His eyes and face couldn't be seen clearly, but the wind blowing around him quietly became weak. Okay. The burly man didn't seem to be in a hurry. He said leisurely, "After we found your innocent and lovely sweetheart, we planned to use her to assassinate you. At first, the Kylan Dragon King didn't cooperate with our plan. He wanted to resist, but he didn't know that we had already prepared a trick. In the end, he was obediently sent to you. You checked his memory and killed him. When he was sent to you, his memory was modified by us. When you looked through his memory, you would know that we had left the Earth. This way, you would relax your vigilance. This trick was learned from the art of war of you humans. As for what happened later, it was very simple. We modified the memory of your sweetheart and hid the fact that you tortured her sister and wantonly slaughtered your compatriots. In this way, she only kept her feelings for you. She didn't know that you had done so many things that made her heartbroken. So, when you met her before, her feelings for you were completely true. Only in this way could she deceive you. Truth and falsehood are the best ways to deceive people. I learned this from you humans. If you can resist the temptation to trust her and don't use your usual methods to look in her memory, she will keep it that way until she is by your side and finds out what you have done in the past through other means. But you looked into his memories. We have long expected you to do this, because we recorded a false memory in her memory. That is the part about her memory recovery. That part will inevitably arouse your suspicion. When you suspect her, you will check her memory. That will just activate the secret button we set in her mind. It is like a hypnotic technique. Your action will trigger the effect of the secret button. After the secret button is triggered, all her memory will be restored. She will remember everything about what you have done. Moreover, we also left an additional memory in her memory. It is the secret of your heart. In this world, the only person who can get close to you, make you defenseless, and assassinate you is only her. In the end, you have to blame yourself for ending up like this. At this point, the burly man chuckled and said, "Now that your heart has been pierced, this is your fatal weakness. Without the sage's engine, you are just a slightly stronger king. Although you have many abilities, your strength is only at the king level. In order to deal with you, we have painstakingly prepared for a long time. We have 3 demigod physiques with sages' hearts embedded in their bodies. Any one of them can kill you 100 times over." Dean was silent. Aisha, who was leaning on Dudion's arms, also heard these words. Her body slightly trembled, and her sad mood fluctuated violently. She looked up at Dean and slightly opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but Dean responded with a gentle smile. "Don't listen to the insects. You have done nothing wrong," he said softly. Aisha burst into tears. "Insects?" The burly man raised his eyebrows, his face full of killing intent. A few insect-like wings extended from his back, and sharp blades extended from his body. "You're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. Is this the specialty of you humans?" Dean slowly raised his head. The gentleness in his eyes turned into indescribable cold, killing intent. "Our specialty is to kill insects." "Oomph." The burly man snorted coldly. He was just about to make a move when he suddenly noticed that his surroundings seemed to be filled with water, and his body actually became extremely heavy. His pupils constricted as he said in horror, "Gravitational field? How can you borrow the magnetic field of the planet?" "Die." Dean squeezed out the words full of madness and extreme coldness from his teeth. The ground, space, and light around him were completely distorted. It was like a black hole was spreading out from his body, annihilating all matter and pushing it out quickly. The spaceship suspended in midair was pulled down by the strong gravitational force that suddenly emerged from the ground. "You are God." The burly man's eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. A hole burst out from his forehead. A blood-red insect crawled out and tried to escape. But before it could flap its wings, it was pulled to the ground by the gravitational force. Darkness spread. The moment the burly man's body came into contact with the pure black light, his body turned into ashes like air. The ground behind him the spaceship, and the flaming demon insects on the ground all collapsed under the corrosion of the darkness, completely annihilated. The darkness spread to a radius of thousands of meters before stopping. After a long time, when the darkness slowly converged, there was only a curved, concave ball on the ground. All the flowers, trees, and soil that were touched by the darkness had disappeared. On another crater thousands of meters away, a figure floated down. The black blade-like wings fluttered behind him. He landed with a beautiful figure in his arms. "I'm sorry." Aisha was lying in Dean's arms. She opened her mouth slightly, and a lot of blood gushed out. The giant blade that penetrated their bodies had disappeared. It was annihilated by the dark energy. This giant blade was the ability of Aisha's magic mark. Its sharpness was not inferior to the splitting blade. It had a very thin, strange energy fluctuation. It could destroy cells from the molecular structure and cause wounds that were difficult to heal. When it penetrated the body, the strange energy would spread to the whole body and destroy all the tissues. Dean smiled and looked at her gently. He shook his head slightly. "I don't blame you. It's me who implicated you again. I'll love you." Aisha raised her hand and wanted to touch his cheek, but her hand slipped down halfway. The giant blade was not only aimed at Dean's heart, but also her heart. She had the intention to perish together with him. Her heart had already been shattered. Although she didn't need to rely on her heart to survive, the energy released by the giant blade had destroyed all the bones and meridians in her body, including the nucleus in the depths of her brain. It was a miracle that she could hold on until now. "I love you too." Dean looked at her gradually slackening eyes. He lowered his head and gently kissed her forehead. Time froze at this moment. The figure that he had been searching for many years passed away in the arms of the youth. Like a gust of wind from the foot of the mountain, it swept past them, taking something with it, and then swept towards the boundless blue horizon. "I love you." The youth's whisper fluttered in the wind and faded away. It was a big chapter of 9,000 words. The Dark King that had been written for a long time had finally come to an end. There were a lot of words to say after every book was finished. This book might have the most words. The afterword would be written in the next chapter. There was also an epilogue that would be published tomorrow night. Chapter 1280. Phew, the king is over. He wanted to smoke a cigarette to reminisce about the faint smell of sadness, but he remembered that he had quit smoking for a long time. He rubbed his hands, sorted out his thoughts, and slowly began to write. Yep, King of the Kings was the longest book I had ever written. If I leveled it up according to the Xuanhuan standard, the word count would double. 6 million words wouldn't be a problem at all. After I defeated a world, I would create another one. After I destroyed the demon bug origami, I would create other high-level species. In the vast universe, it would be a piece of cake for me to create a few random species. But it wasn't the king. From the beginning of the first chapter of the book, I had already thought about the ending scene. The female lead hugged the main character who had gone through hardships to become a god. She would pierce their bodies with a sharp sword, and they would sleep in each other's arms. But only the female lead would die. The male lead would still be alive. Yes, the sad ending had been doomed from the beginning. At the beginning of every book, I would habitually outline the scene of the ending scene. So this book was doomed to be a tragedy from the beginning. Dean wasn't a positive protagonist. He wasn't even a protagonist. He was just a tragedy born in this environment. But what I wanted to express was not his sorrow, but the sorrow of the environment. It was also the sorrow of human beings. In the middle of the book, some people said that the protagonist was cruel and dark. They couldn't stand it and abandoned the book. I saw it, but I still silently wrote mine. Some people abandoned the book because they were afraid of affecting their worldview. But I couldn't agree with someone who said that this book was purely describing the darkness and playing up the dark psychology. In the works with the strongest light, the darkness was clearly visible. In the dark side, the light of human kindness would be particularly moving. This was a common comparison in literature. The king also belonged to the dark side, but I didn't depict too much of human nature. Because I didn't want to, because I wanted to write about a dark and sad world. The world might seem far away from us, but in fact, it might be around us. It was a world without a trace of light. In the past, the protagonist was a role model for everyone. He represented justice. Even if he wasn't a righteous gangster, he still had to conform to the moral bottom line. It seemed that the protagonist was a role model that everyone should learn from. But Dean wasn't. He is alone. He is the crystallization of human nature, as I understand it. His end cannot be changed, and there is only one, and it is not a happy life. In the process of writing this book, I was also slowly learning how to view the world and many things. I used to be naive and hot-blooded, but now I'm silent. Some people say that this book is too gloomy, but the person who is affected the most is me. So I wanted to write a happy, light-hearted book. But when he was writing the outline, he couldn't help but analyze it in depth. Once he did, he would discover many things that he couldn't see, something that light cannot shine upon. Perhaps it would be difficult for his future works to break away from this influence. Perhaps this was the seed of the beginning of his style, but I don't want to be limited by a certain style, just like I don't want to be a sci-fi author who only knows how to write about the end of the world. I was originally lively and mischievous, but now I seem to have lost interest in many things. My desires were slowly diminishing, and I couldn't bring myself to do anything, as if everything was dull and uninteresting. Only by stopping his brain from thinking and not thinking would he feel happy. Just like when he was chatting with his wife and family, he didn't need to use his brain to think and was happy. Living happily is the most comfortable way to live. The sorrow of bitterness and hatred will only make him seem bitter and a bit pretentious. But when writing King, he had to sink his heart, think, analyze, and use the perspective of King to see many things. Then his mood would become gloomy. At first, I just wanted to write about a slightly real, cruel world, adding a little more depth. For example, the giant wall, which symbolizes the human heart. People are imprisoned by the giant wall, not daring to step out, just like they are imprisoned by the fear in their hearts, not daring to step out. So they will never know whether the outside world is beautiful or ugly. So I told what the outside world is like. It is cruel, it is ugly, it is monsters. This is the dark tone of the book. But slowly writing, constantly digging deeper and deeper, thinking deeply, and then slowly writing. Maybe the expression is not good, but what the book wants to express is basically written. In the later stages, there's actually nothing to write, because this book mainly talks about the journey of the mind. There is no limit to the rise of strength. One can break through the world, but the heart has a limit. When the heart completely degenerates into a king, who can save it? This journey of the mind is also my own understanding. From the beginning, I planned to write it as a business to make money, but after dozens of chapters, I found that I can write a lot of ideas. But these ideas will conflict with leveling up and fighting monsters, contrary to the business, but I was reluctant to give up. So when the book was on the shelves, Dadian was imprisoned and the subscriptions plummeted. This is extremely traumatic for the book, but I didn't regret it. After being in prison, I didn't often read the book reviews. I thought that since the subscriptions were gone, it would be useless to go back. Chapter 1281. I'll write the epilogue of Kings of Darkness tomorrow. I'm tired from writing yesterday, so I'm taking a break. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1282. There was only one main color in the vast universe, and that was darkness. A meteor streaked across the sky. The radiance that flashed in that instant was like the descent of a god. It was gorgeous and dazzling, enough to attract everyone's attention in an instant. Although it was short, it seemed like an eternity. However, the feeling of eternity in that instant would eventually fade away with the passing of people's memories until they were forgotten. Life itself was not eternal. So how could one remember the eternity of a meteor? What was truly eternal was the darkness in the vast universe. It was just that this darkness was often ignored by people as the background and only paid attention to the gorgeous radiance of the meteor and stars. It was just like how people remembered the great people and heroes in history the most, but ignored the background behind them. However, no one could truly erase this darkness. Even the sun that emitted heat was just a tiny light in the vast universe. It would eventually age and be extinguished, and then turn into a dark ruin. This was fate, and also the final destination. On a desolate planet, there were no forests that could purify oxygen, nor were there rivers or seas. There were only frozen snow mountains or active volcanoes that were ready to erupt magma at any time. There were no buildings here, only some strange caves. For example, on an iceberg, there were many pitch-black caves that looked like small holes. Looking at them from afar, it was easy for people to develop trypophobia. At this moment, on a precipitous, snowy mountain, 3 figures held hands and strolled leisurely. In the snow behind them, there were many long, snow-white things that looked like snakes made of cotton scattered all over the ground. In the middle of these 3 people was a young man with black hair and eyes. His left hand was holding the hand of a girl who looked to be 7 or 8 years old. Her cheeks were as delicate as porcelain, and she was very beautiful. Her facial features were pure and natural. On the right hand of the young man was holding the hand of a beautiful woman in a purple cheongsam. She was devastatingly beautiful, and her temperament was clear and noble. However, her expression was indifferent, without the slightest emotion. Her eyes were also indifferent, as if she was not hiding any emotions. "Dad, the environment here is much worse than on Earth." The petite little girl sniffled and pouted at the young man. "It's really uncomfortable to stay here." The young man smiled. "Your body has the structure of an earthling. Of course, it's not suitable for this place. These demonic insects have a very low demand for oxygen. In addition, the entire planet is in an extremely cold or hot environment, which is not suitable for plants to grow. Water is also scarce, so it looks desolate. Of course, it doesn't look good. No wonder these demonic insects want to leave this place." The little girl snorted. The young man smiled faintly and led her and the beautiful woman to sit down. The instant he sat down, the ice and snow beneath them melted and turned emerald green. Countless tender grass and flowers bloomed, extending far into the distance, turning into a 10-meter wide green field of flowers and grass. The fragrance of the flowers was pleasing to the nose. With a single thought, 100 flowers bloomed. This kind of ability was completely beyond the comprehension of humans, but to the gods, it was a very common thing. "Dad, can you make my body grow faster?" The little girl took the young man's hand and said coquettishly, "Just like my previous body, I want to be an adult, not a child." "But you're a child." The young man patted her head and said with a smile, "Children have to grow slowly. Otherwise, if they grow too fast, they will become deformed." "Dad is stingy." The little girl pouted and turned her head away angrily with her arms crossed. The young man looked up and could see countless stars in the sky above him. They were extremely clear, and he could also see 2 extremely huge planets. They were extremely close to this demonic planet, and he could even see the craters on the surface of the 2 planets. This kind of scenery was also somewhat interesting. He looked at it quietly, and one of his hands slowly tightened on the beautiful woman in the purple cheongsam beside him. He turned his head, and his eyes fell on her expressionless and cold face, but his eyes were filled with extreme gentleness. "The scenery here, do you like it?" The beautiful woman did not answer, as if she did not hear anything. The young man did not seem to care at all, and his eyes were still as gentle as water. "After we destroy this place, I will take you to the origami planet to have a look. I heard that there is nothing there, but I can transform that place into the appearance of Earth before, just like when we first met." The beautiful woman still did not say anything. Like a stone statue, she only sat straight and did not move. "Dad, why don't you let Mom really resurrect? That way she can chat with you?" The little girl beside her was full of curiosity, and her big watery eyes looked at the young man. The young man smiled slightly, looked up into the distance, and said to himself, "Your mom loves me very much, so she wants to kill me. I also love her very much, so I can't let her wake up. Why? Because of love. I don't understand, and don't touch." Oh, after a long time, the young man seemed to have rested well, and he had seen enough of the scenery here. He slowly stood up, holding the little girl and the beautiful woman's hand. "Let's go. We will go to the origami planet to play." The young man smiled. "Yes, yes." The little girl cheered, but then she thought of something and her face became a little sad. "After the origami planet is destroyed, will we return to Earth?" "We won't go back." The young man smiled. "Let them fend for themselves. We will continue to look for new planets. If we can't find one, I will make one for you as an amusement park." "Create? Well, we will destroy it when we are tired of it." "Well, let's create it first," and it was completely over. It was over. Maybe there were too many words in the last chapter, so some people didn't read it carefully. It was explained that Aisha attacked Dean because she didn't know about the existence of the worm and the conspiracy of the origami. Her memory was still in the pattern of Sylvia, and her memory was tampered with by the worm. Why didn't the protagonist find it when he looked through her memory? Because the behavior of looking through her memory triggered the mechanism buried in Aisha's body, and her memory was restored. In other words, the protagonist activated the mechanism, which led to the final tragedy. Why did the protagonist activate the mechanism? It was because of the betrayal and suspicion. The protagonist's emotions were real, but the protagonist's character wasn't the same. There were some changes that he couldn't detect. So the protagonist would look through her memory and activate the mechanism, which led to the final tragedy. This was the sadness of life and experience. We thought that we wouldn't change, but we had changed a long time ago. As the introduction said, the virus was rampant. Where was the original face of a human? It had long been unrecognizable. I have written several books about the doomsday, but I didn't have the motivation to write about it. As early as when I wrote about the Dark Civilization, I wanted to write about the idea that the doomsday wasn't just about zombies. The doomsday was about the human heart. The city was also the doomsday. Just like the words of Nerinus, as long as there is desire, there will be destruction. As long as there is desire, there will be doomsday. I personally think that the doomsday is not limited to a theme, but a deep meaning. Just like love is not limited to romance. In all books, there can be love between the male and female protagonists. This book expressed this idea. Maybe it wasn't expressed well, or maybe no one cared, but I felt that it was a good ending to my doomsday. Before I could think about something deeper, I wouldn't write about the doomsday again, because I had already written about everything I needed to write about. Unless it was a Schwanhuan of the doomsday, killing monsters to level up, then I might as well write a Schwanhuan. This book didn't have a trace of light. Just like the beginning of the epilogue. Even if there was light, the light of human nature would eventually be extinguished. This was the doomsday. In the darkest and deepest environment, praying was also sad, because the God you prayed to might be the source of disaster. All in all, I personally felt that the ending was not bad. There weren't any regrets. Finally, thank you all for following me. Thank you all for clicking, recommending, and tipping. Sometimes, the readers in the group would remind me about things that I didn't even notice. I could feel that many of you were even more dedicated than me, the author. King was not only my child, but also everyone's care. Thank you all. Forgive me for being unrestrained and loving my freedom. I was also afraid that one day I would fall. Oh, all right, I can't sing anymore. The final stop. Goodbye, my friends. Chapter 1283. The new book of King of Darkness has been released. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.